Welcome to the Fantasy Fangirls podcast, where two sisters dive deep into beloved fantasy lore, characters, themes, theories, and more.
I'm Lexi, older sister and fantasy lore nerd.
And I'm Nicole, younger sister and romantic at heart.
And today's episode is every, and we mean every, Maasverse connection we made from the ACOTAR series.
During our 11 months of ACOTAR deep dive coverage, almost every episode had a section at the end called Maasverse Madness, where we discussed all the Maasverse crossovers and theories from that stretch of chapters. Today is a compilation of all those Maasverse Madnesses. So there's a lot of them, if you can tell by the timestamp of this podcast.
Enjoy watching 11 months of us with our hair evolution and our backgrounds evolution and all of that fun stuff. If you're watching, I suppose, yes.
It was very much a time of growth for Lexi and I.
Yes. Friends, please listen closely to our spoiler warning. Today's episode is all about the Maasverse. It is a Maasverse compilation. So, spoilers for all of the Maasverse. That is all 8 books of Throne of Glass, all 3 books of Crescent City, and all 5 books in ACOTAR.
This episode, in case you haven't gathered, is literally called Maasverse. You know what you're getting yourself into. So if you have not finished every single book in the Maasverse and you don't want spoilers, then please go read whatever books you have remaining. We will be here when you're done.
Next, we at Fantasy Fangirls are adults who say adult things about adult books. In other words, friends, this podcast is rated R.
One of these Maasverse sections is definitely from chapter 55 of ACOTAR, which is the sex chapter, in case you don't remember. Yeah! So please be mindful of those little listening ears.
Additionally, we would love to see you at upcoming live events. We've got 3 live shows coming up in September. The first is in Chicago on September 9th. Then we have Charlotte, North Carolina on September 24th and New York City on September 27th.
Then we have our ACOTAR 6 and 7 midnight release parties with Tattered Cover and Book and Gather in Denver, Colorado. As of right now, ACOTAR 6 is sold out, but there are still some tickets to celebrate ACOTAR 7's release with us in Denver. Links to all of these events and more are in the show notes and on our website. Check it out for all the details.
Last thing before we jump into this Maasverse compilation re-release episode, if you love Fantasy Fangirls and want more events, more content, more community, and so much more, please check out Fantasy Fan Club.
We have 6 media network tiers that you can join, 3 of which are Fantasy Fangirls specific. Number 1, the Hive Mind, which includes access to our Boppin' Discord, live Q&As from Lexi and I, book club. This month is Daggermouth, one of Lexi and I's absolute favorites, plus 20% off and access to exclusive merch. That's all for $6 a month. Then there's the Spice Watchers that has everything from the Hive Mind tier. Also, early access to ad-free episodes. Woohoo! And our full episode outlines and special voting privileges. That is for $10 a month. And last but certainly not least, we have the Feral Fans, which includes everything from the previous 2 tiers, plus behind the scenes content, a welcome gift, giveaways, private Discord channel, and your name shouted out on the podcast. That is for $25 a month.
Join the party and learn more at fantasyfangirls.com/fanclub. The link is also in the show notes. And thank you so much, friends, from the bottom of our hearts for supporting us at Fantasy Fangirls. This compilation is from 2 years ago, and the growth that there has been, this community that has been built, it means absolutely everything to us, and we are so happy that you're here. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And now it is time to go soaring through the universes to Aurelia, Lunathian, and of course, Prithian. Let's start with the Throne of Glass through Era Fire reference first. Word markings. So on the cottage for Feyre's family, we get, quote, faded ward markings etched around the threshold. Well, it doesn't really do anything for Timmy Tam. It does not do anything to help keep him out. But many people believe that this is a nod to word marks or even actual word marks from the Throne of Glass series. And this is not the last word marks nod we will get in the ACOTAR world. We also get a mention of iron. And something I find really interesting is the difference of iron in the ACOTAR world versus the Throne of Glass world. In ACOTAR, iron doesn't do diddly squat against these fairies, but it's a big rumor among humans that iron will defend against them. Like Lexi said, both Elaine and Nesta have iron on their person when they go into town. Isaac has an iron cuff. Elaine will eventually have an iron engagement ring. Yikes. But we later learn from Tamlin and Lucian that iron doesn't do anything against fairies, which is odd because in Throne of Glass, we learned that iron diminishes the fairy magic. But we know from Crescent City that the Tog Fae and the ACOTAR Fae are two different types of Fae. So perhaps the iron only works for that one type, but then it brings into the conversation, do we believe that someone from the Throne of Glass world is a world walker and brought the rumor about iron working against fairies into the ACOTAR human lands, thinking that it was the same type of fairy? We don't know, but that's my guess. Nesta is described as a queen without a throne in these opening chapters. In Crescent City 3, when Bryce leaves Prythian for the last time, she gives Nesta the Star Sword, or Gwydion, as it's familiar in our ACOTAR world, saying basically, go figure out why the fucking 8-pointed star was tattooed on your back. While it's theorized that Elaine will become High Lady of the Spring Court, just like Feyre is the High Lady of the Night Court, it's also theorized that Nesta will become the High Lady of the resurrected Dusk Court, which we know the Dusk Court was on the same land that the prison is now on. The prison had an 8-pointed star on the floor when Nesta went to go and get the harp, which is one of the Dread Trove items. So it would make sense that if Nesta had this tattoo and Bryce was like, wink, wink, hint, hint, it sounds like you have some kind of connection to this Dusk Court nonsense, it might make sense that her and Cassian go off to resurrect this Dusk Court. First one is, as Feyre is walking around looking for Lucian, she feels like two someones are watching her. Quote, a faint sniff and a quiet giggle issued from far too close. The shimmering in the corner of my eye grew larger, separating into two small figures no taller than my waist. Some people believe that these are the little folk or fairies from the Throne of Glass world, who are the smaller cousins to the human-like fae. While their forms do vary, there are very specific ones who regularly watch Selena in the forest when she is on her way to the Glass Castle, and even leave her gifts later on in the series. It's not a direct one-to-one comparison, however, they are described as full of mischief in Tog, and curious and wanting to play in ACOTAR. So it is possible that these are two different types of species, but it's fun to think that they are the same ones, just in different universes.
Also, Tamlin inquires to Feyre, do you speak to mercenaries often? After last episode, a lot of people pointed out to us that the mercenary is a similar description to Fury Extar from Crescent City. This is not the only mention to someone who could be Fury as we get into the ACOTAR books, but we are saving a big deep dive on Fury's potential presence in this world for a later episode. Before we get into the Pool of Starlight theories, I want to point out the small symbols that Feyre notices in the mural. They're part of the contents poured out from the cauldron, and she notes that perhaps there's some ancient fairy language. We learn from House of Flame and Shadow, I'm pausing real quick in case you need to jump off, okay, spoilers incoming, that Midgard and Prythian share the same ancient old fae language. When Bryce speaks it, Amren confirms it hasn't been heard in 15,000 years. I'm guessing this must be the ancient fae language from way back when in this world.
One thing I do want to say on that note, though, is there are a lot of crossover theories thinking that word marks and this same Midgard and Prythian ancient fae language are all the same ancient fae language.
Okay, we're going to summarize several Starlight crossover references and theories. Please do understand that we are only scratching the surface here because there are some deep rabbit holes. Let's look at Crescent City theories first. Number 1, this liquid starlight is a form of first light. Crescent City's Autumn King was researching a very similar liquid to the description we get of starlight. He was studying an iridescent liquid for, quote, how light moves through the world, how it can be shaped.
We do get confirmation that the Daglin in the ACOTAR world are indeed the Asteri in the Crescent City world. The Asteri fed off of first light, and we know that the Daglin drank liquid magic like wine. Put 2 and 2 together, the Daglin drank first light, aka what we call the Pool of Starlight here. So this Pool of Starlight, for lack of a better word, is left over from 15,000 years ago when the Daglin ruled. Or if we know that this starlight is first light, and we know that the High Lord's magic comes from the earth, does that mean on Calamite they're producing first light? Quite possibly, or shedding a tiny bit of it. Obviously, it's not like the drop at all, but Calamai could be their way of giving a little first light, aka starlight, back into the earth to keep the magic of the land flourishing. Now, theory number 2, connecting the Crescent City world, we're going back to the explanation of Tamlin and Rhys's sister being mates. Remember, the Night Court and the Spring Court are enemies, and they fought on opposite ends of the war. If Tamlin and Rhys's sister were mates, this alliance would have been seen as a threat, because this would have been joining two rival courts. Very Romeo and Juliet. Side note, last episode we speculated why Tamlin doesn't use his shape-shifting to make wings. This might be one of the reasons why, because he was so pained by losing his mate. It would also make sense that Tamlin already had a mate, why he never mentioned him and Feyre having a mating bond. He never said that their mating bond would happen for them, and in fact, it's always Feyre who is wanting it to click into place or wondering when it'll click into place. Little does she know. Back to him and Rhys's sister being mates, though. As a mating present, like Lexi said earlier, Tamlin could have received the Pool of Starlight from Rhys's sister, or also, like Lexi mentioned earlier, Tamlin could have burned the wings here, and that's how the Pool of Starlight emerged. But Nicole, what does this have to do with CC spoilers? Well, because in CC3, when Selene appears in the prison, Azriel says, quote, "She looks like Rhysand's sister." Now, Selene wouldn't be Rhysand's sister per se. Those timelines definitely wouldn't match up, but Selene could definitely be a direct descendant. And Selene was a member of what family line? Yep, the Starborn Fae. So it could make sense that this direct descendant of the Starborn Fae was tied to this Pool of Starlight, whether it was a gift of her mate or her wings being burned on that site. Number 3, some wonder if the Pool of Starlight can seep into the ground and charge certain magical paths. Lexi mentioned earlier how it could be a portal, but let's tie it to both Throne of Glass and for Crescent City. For instance, the magical ley lines of Crescent City or Silba's tomb in the Torre Chesme from Tog would be of similar instances here. But in A Court of Silver Flames, Amren says about the Bog of Urid, quote, "They say the water there flows to under the mountain, and the creatures who live in the bog have long used its underground waterways to travel through the middle, even into the mountains of surrounding courts." So these waterways do exist in Prythian. But this type of source, almost, that first light-esque and feeding into the ground for the Daglin and the Asteri, it could have also been traveling under the waterways to the Hewn City, to whatever is under Ramiel, or to under the prison where one of the Asteries was waiting for 15,000 years, aka the remnants of the Dust Court.
And to keep it going here with Throne of Glass, there is a river in Empire of Storms where Aelin and the crew are on a boat and the caves were, quote, "filled with starlight." There could be very similar magic at play here, maybe not directly connected, but again, those same types of magic, same types of things in these different universes. There's also just the full-blown possibility that the Pool of Starlight is a word gate and portal into these other realms too, not just a portal between Prythian, but to these other realms as a whole.
Well, let us not forget that in Kingdom of Ash, Aelin is shooting across the night sky, across many different portals, and she is supposedly one of the spirits on Starfall. So Starfall, Pool of Starlight, she might have used that as a word. There could all be connected there. I don't know. So Feyre, in her goodbye to Nesta, says, quote, "There is a better world, Nesta. There's a better world out there waiting for you to find it." Oh, I'm getting chills. I couldn't help but read this and think of Nesta in chapter 100 of, Jesus Christ, it's a lot of chapters, of Crescent City 3. In one of her
I'm so glad we're not doing Crescent City.
Oh my God, can you imagine so many chapters? In one of the most heart-wrenching chapters of CC3, there's not a lot, so the bar is kind of low, but there's this one at least. Ember tells Nesta, quote, "You'll find your way." This feels so reminiscent of Feyre's goodbye to Nesta here in book 1 of ACOTAR, telling her there's a better world out there waiting for you to find it. But there's that extra element of, quote, "waiting for you to find it." Let us not forget that Bryce's parting words to Nesta are, quote, "I think that 8-pointed star was tattooed on you for a reason. Take that sword and go figure out why." There is a better world out there for Nesta to discover, Prythian, her mate. But what if this also includes the Dusk Court? Speaking of Nesta and the Dusk Court, we get a possible foreshadowing moment for her being a high lady or some element of power. Quote, "There were no limits to what Nesta might do, what she might make for herself when she found a place to call her own." I prayed I would be lucky enough to see it someday. Don't like that foreshadowing with knowing her and Rhys's bond that they make at the end of ACOWAR. But this right here is just a blatant neon sign that, yes, she's going to make a place. She's going to find a family to call her own. The found family trope is everywhere in Silver Flames. but a place to call her own might be a court to call her own.
There's a theory that Amarantha is Vogue, and we'll explore this more in future books as we dissect the King of Hybern also being a possible Vogue too, but of course we got to talk about Amarantha right here. While Amarantha is very powerful, I'd assume she would be a Vogue princess and not a queen. Princesses are not as powerful as queens. I imagine the King of Hybern would be a Vogue king in comparison. If you need a quick reminder, Vogue are demons from another realm in the Throne of Glass series. They are powerful and malicious and can possess people by going inside the host bodies to control them. Vogue princes, or princesses in this case, are especially cold and calculating. They delight in both emotional pain as well as physical torture. Hey, that sounds like our girl Amarantha, compared to the regular Vogue, which are more like Vogue royalties, I'll say henchmen. The adder, speaking of henchmen, is a very similar description as the ilken, which are huge demonic creatures with large wings and venomous claws. They are cronies of the Vogue, so this would definitely fit for the adder to be like an ilken if Amarantha or Hybern are Vogue.
So adders do live in the Aurelia world.
I have not finished the series and I do not know that.
Well, there you go.
Hybern's book does seem to be a wordmark book, so Amarantha may be using the Throne of Glass universe magic because, well, hey, they're crossovers. Amarantha, this is one of the biggest emphases of why people think that she is a Vogue. She has black eyes, which is the signature trait of a Vogue inside someone. So Amarantha may be Vogue, specifically a princess because of how powerful she is.
Now, here's one thing I do want to say is that Amarantha's blood in the next stretch is not described as black, and that would be
Correct.
something definitely described. However, Maeve, who is a Vogue queen, did trick Rowan and the fellow cadre into believing that she was not Vogue and she was just totally normal by glamoring, for lack of a better term, glamoring her blood to appear normal. So this is not out of the question that that magic does exist and that Amarantha could have done that. But what a time to do that is like, oh my God, my throat's being ripped out by a man bear pig, but glamour.
Speaking of which, Amarantha isn't necessarily beheaded, which is one of the surefire ways to kill a Vogue, which plus fire is another way. But her throat is literally ripped out by Tamlin, so I guess close enough. I will say this. I don't think Amarantha has enough of her own power to inflict onto others the way that the Vogue easily can. She more so seems to use the high phase trapped powers against them to protect herself from them. But hey, I love this theory. I think it's fun and possible, especially with the whole like her red blood having to be glamored there. If she is a Vogue, though, I'm going to go with no on the Tamlin is her mate theory. I don't think that both of them would be true if either one of them are true. Having Tamlin's mate be a Vogue, that would be a real tough look for him, and I don't think that fits.
I would go more with she is using the magic of word marks and is not Vogue.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, I think that would be more what I'd lean towards. An old name from one of our earlier dialects. What earlier dialects? Could this be a Prythian version of the old language? Or could this be the language that Amryn mentions in the Book of Breathings, like I mentioned earlier, aka the language of Bryce's tattoo, aka word marks? I doubt it, just because word marks are so unique and like how they're described and how, like, especially with the Book of Breathings, like it's possible, but I doubt it. I think it's more likely that this old language is closer to Rowan's tattoo, which is in a script of an old language, specifically not stated as word marks.
I agree with that, especially with saying earlier dialects. I don't think that is the old Fae language that hasn't been spoken in 15,000 years. Like that shocked Amryn.
Yeah.
So I don't think that this would be just casually tossed around in this way. So I do think that it is more so just one of their older dialects. And it plays a lot more into Feyre's heritage versus the multiverse there.
Agreed. I do love the idea that it's in the same or similar language as Rowan's tattoos. I
hadn't thought about it that way. I love that so much. Yes,
love you, Rowan. You beautiful silver-haired man. Lady of Autumn. We gotta talk about her. So it is interesting that we never learn the Lady of Autumn's name, like I mentioned in the deep dive. But like most questions, I went to Reddit. And Kara Auden had an interesting post about this, wondering if after we learned about her affair with Helion, Baron pulled some Tog magic using a similar spell that was put on the King of Otterland, aka Dorian the First, and made to forget their name and identity. Personally, I am leaning away from this theory because of how she is still so connected emotionally to Lucian and wanting to save him. And we saw what happened to Daddy-O Dorian. He didn't give a flying fuck about baby Dorian. But on this thread, Nate Translates had a different take, wondering if her name is instead more of a connection to the Autumn King or Rune Danon's line. Since we know his line of fae is from the Prythian world, this would not be out of the question if they are related. Now, Rune looking just like Rhys is where I have some raised eyebrows on that, but I just found it interesting, the idea that Lady of Autumn's name could be connected to these other worlds as well. Next. The Midgard worm being from Midgard, ? Because of the portals in these worlds, it is not out of the question that the Midgard worm is from Crescent City's Midgard.
Bryce even asks if they came from her world originally, and I quote, horrific as the creature was, to have another being from her world here was oddly comforting. That's a Bryce reaction, to say the least.
That's a Bryce Crescent City 3 reaction, to say the least.
Yeah. Then Nesta goes on to be like, I don't fucking know. Like, how would I know? She doesn't even know that Bryce's world existed a week ago. Of course she doesn't know. And I love how Nesta goes on to confirm that the Midgard worms aren't common, but she mentions how Feyre defeated one. I absolutely loved seeing this on the page when I was reading House of Flame and Shadow, tying us right back to this first book and Feyre's first task going up against one. And Nesta's like, dang, I thought she exaggerated the painting, but nope, that thing is as terrifying as she depicted. What a sisterly reaction right there. But just in general, we get a Midgard worm in both books. Granted, it's in the same world that they occur, but it was nice to see the Alaskan bullworm again in House of Flame and Shadow.
And just a quick note to kind of even more so separate these. Midgard in Norse, in Old Norse, means Middle Earth, and midden, as in the first part of Midgard worm, in Old Norse means manure pile. And in Norse, dragons are typically depicted as worms and stated as such, but it's typically spelled W-O-R-M. So if we're really translating this word for, like, basically word for word, in Old Norse, Midgard worm means manure pile dragon. So I do not think that they are connected.
This next crossover call out is actually in reference to our Under the Mountain surreal segment, after highlighting the sacred mountain in the middle. While under the mountain, Feyre notices carvings on the walls that depicted fairies and high fae and animals in various environments and states of movement. They're described as stories of Prythian. You know where else we've seen these stories of a land? Let's go back to House of Flame and Shadow with Vesperus, one of the Daglin, and the only one left behind after the rest were defeated and forced to flee Prythian. This is the one Bryce stupidly frees and Nesta has to kill. I know Nicole's like, don't you dare get on this high horse right now. We don't have time for that. Go listen to our CC3 reactions video.
Or our interview with Daniel where he just goes off on this book.
Vesperus and the rest of the Daglin had hidden a pool of their magic under, quote, every sacred mountain. Amarantha's court under the mountain is literally under one of Prythian's sacred mountains, so we can infer that the Daglin hid one of their magical pools in this sacred mountain. We see more of these kind of carvings in the caves in part 1 of House of Flame and Shadow when Azriel, Bryce, and Nesta are heading towards the prison and encounter Vesperus. The carvings show warnings of booby traps and tell stories of great fae battles, lovemaking, and childbirth, a masked queen, and a crown on her head, bearing instruments in her hand. Hello, dread troves. They are also in a sacred mountain at the time. And then there are also these carvings in Avalon's caves, called the Cave of Princes or Helena's Cave. Remember that Avalon is considered a thin place, which makes it ideal for traveling between or communicating with other worlds. It is where Peleus, the first starborn prince who originated from Prythian, and his descendants rested. This is a whole other rabbit hole to go down. I'm going to stop here and simply stick to pointing out these story carvings and how they all tie together in our stories. Makes you wonder if there's more to these sacred mountains than we already know, and I could definitely see us exploring more of their meanings and how these worlds are further connected, with Nesta on her quest to see why she was chosen for the 8-pointed star.
The priestesses, now that we have them in our story, I want to call out the priestesses in the 3 worlds of the Maasverse. They're occasionally mentioned in the Throne of Glass, more of just like a part of the world, a part of the society. But there is an important moment when Aelin, she's going by Selena at the time, in Heir of Fire, realizes where the 3rd word key is. Quote, "It had been around her neck the night that she fell into the river, and around the neck of every one of her ancestors going back to Brandon himself, when he stopped at the sun goddess's temple to take the medallion from Mala High Priestess, and then destroyed the entire site to prevent anyone from tracing his steps." Priestesses are also mentioned in Assassin's Blade during the short story of when Selena is heading to the desert to train as a punishment from Erebin. There's mentioned a white-haired priestess in this stretch who worshipped Lani, the goddess of dreams. White-haired, I automatically relate it to Rowan, so I have some questions there, but that's for Throne of Glass deep dive. That's for the Assassin's Blade deep dive. Some noticeable priestesses in the Crescent City world are obviously Jessica Roga. She was the priestess of the Great Library of Parthos, and she was present when the library was attacked 15,000 years prior to the beginning of our story. This is when she takes all the books, she hops on a ship, and then for 15,000 years, she's just basically the garter of knowledge and an awesome bitch. I love Jessica. R.I.P. my girl. You shouldn't have died. I'm pissed about it. Separately from our high priestesses, though, Tamlin mentions how there's never been a high lady, but that's technically actually not true. During our download with Celine from Crescent City 3 Under the Prison, she mentions how the High Lord of the Night Court at the time was wanting her, Celine, to become High Lady of the Night Court, but she refused. However, it's stated as, quote, "He wanted me to be High Lady as the other lords' mates were, but I refused." So technically there were High Ladies, just like 15,000 years ago.
Interesting. Speaking of Tamlin, we get another connection between Tamlin and a stag. So let's pull out the significant stags in the other universes. Every mention of a stag in the entire ACOTAR series, but one, is in reference to Tamlin. So I really do think of Tamlin very closely connected to the stags. Yeah. In Throne of Glass, the Lord of the North appears as a huge white stag with flaming antlers and an immortal glow. He is the symbol of Terrasen and lives in the oak-walled forest and is considered a beacon of hope. What does Tamlin have to hunt and kill on Calamai? A great white stag. And then Tamlin, he's also a shapeshifter. And Lydia from Crescent City shifts into a deer. While we're talking about shapeshifters, we have to give Lysandra from Throne of Glass a huge shout out there. She is also a very rare shapeshifter. I believe that the stag connection between these worlds, plus Tamlin's shapeshifting power, it's a small link to a much greater interconnection. And I'm so excited to dive more into that later on.
There are some people who wonder if Tamlin is from the Throne of Glass world. However, the iron is what makes me think no, he's not. Because in Throne of Glass, the Fae, who are all shapeshifters, yes, but they all have one animal form that they transform into. Like, for instance, right. Aelin, her animal form is a human. Rowan's is a bird form. You know, Fenris, we have a dog. Is it a hawk? I know she just calls him Fluffy or Feathers or whatever it is, and it's perfect. Ruffled or something like that. God, I love their connection. But because Tamlin is able to shapeshift into anything, much more Lysandra, I would say that he's much more connected to the Lysandra form of magic. But because of the iron thing, I don't think that he's from that world necessarily.
I don't think he personally is from that world, but I could definitely see. Well, no, because now we're getting really crazy here, because there's the Tog phase, and then there are the ACOTAR phase, and then Crescent City is where they all come together.
Yes.
So let's pull ourselves out of that rabbit hole right now. So I don't think that there is I'll say a direct correlation or a direct connection between him specifically and any of these other worlds. But I do think that there is some symbolism here that does link all of those together, and his shapeshifting as well as the stag are among those.
Absolutely. We learn how winnowing works in this stretch of chapters, and the description of, quote, 2 different points on a piece of cloth sounds familiar. It's because it should sound familiar. It is almost identical language to CC2 when Cormac is describing how to teleport. Quote, "You have to picture where you want to go, then simply allow yourself to take that step as if you were folding 2 points on a piece of paper so that the 2 points can meet." We do know that in the ACOTAR world, it is extremely rare to winnow, and in CC, it's even more so. Bryce can only do it if she's charged up, and I believe she actually only knows 2 other people who can do it. Don't quote me on that number. But in Throne of Glass, Fenris and Connell are the only 2 known characters who have this power. I tried to search for if there was ever a description of their version of this power, and I couldn't find it, so I don't know if it is similar to the CC and the ACOTAR language.
The Tithe Fairies, quote, as the next fairy, a goat-legged fawn bearing what looked to be a basket of mushrooms. Hello, Juniper race of fairy. That's awesome to see her. Not her specifically, but a similar race as her.
So it is important to know that when the Daglin moved to being the Asteri in Midgard, she is the race of fairy that came from the ACOTAR world rather than the Throne of Glass world, we can assume, based on this description. But speaking of the tithe, there is also another tithe. When the Daglin ruled Prythian, Selene mentions how there was a once-a-year tithe, which is offering up the kernels of power as tribute. Obviously, they did not have a drop in the Daglin rule of Prythian, so this was their version of the drop in order to feed the Asteri.
Today's segment is going to focus on all 3 Crescent City books and up to Empire of Storms.
First up, is it possible that Cormac is also a shadow singer? Because in House of Flame and Shadow, Bryce is observing Asriel and, quote, could have sworn shadows wreathed him like runes, yet wilder, the way Cormac's have been. When Cormac appears in Crescent City 2, Rune Dannon knew 3 things, and number 1 is, quote, he wasn't looking into a portal of hell after all. Shadows swirled there instead. Familiar, whispering shadows. Also, it is repeatedly mentioned throughout the book that Cormac's shadows are trailing up and down his arms, wrapping around him, unlike runes that are closer to Rhys's power of night, shadow-esque. If Cormac is a shadow singer, odds are that he is a very unpracticed or untrained one, considering that we never really learn about these abilities beyond little hints here and there. And Boy is dead now, so we're probably not ever going to learn.
Those in Avalon have the parasite too, though, right? So he was infected with it, which limited his powers. I wonder if he had been at full power, would his shadow singing power be stronger and possibly more refined?
Yes. Shall we get into some Amren theories?
Oh, let's just start scraping the surface. By the way, friends, like there's so many Maasverse references as we continue on with ACOTAR series. We're going to do our best, but these are not the bulk of the episodes. So we're going to just tease them out episode by episode.
And also keep in mind, we still have all of ACOWAR and all of Silver Flames, which are heavy Maasverse crossovers and everything. So we're, like Lexi said, we're really just scraping the surface here. When we meet Amren, we get mention of how Amren's eyes are silver and unearthly. I was curious about other silver eyes in the Maasverse, and I could only find one, which was Erebin. I definitely do not think they're connected by any lineage way for a multitude of reasons, but it is interesting that we don't hear mention of his silver eyes until Queen of Shadows, which SJM released Queen of Shadows September 2015, and Akamath came out 8 months later. So she would have been working on them either simultaneously, if not back to back. So maybe she just, was digging silver eyes that year. But they're about 114,653.
I was going to say.
Revolving around Amren, and there is no way for us to go through all of them right now, but let's bring up just a few. The first one is the Malakine theory. This is from a post by Elbrunska on Reddit. When Rigelus was giving his Bad Deuce speech at the end of Crescent City 2, he mentions how the Asteri bred a few versions of the angels until they had the Malakine, who are the angels we now know in the Crescent City universe. The Malakine, spelled differently in Hebrew, means angels or messengers. Side note, when Cassian asks Amren in ACOWAR what she is, what does she say? A messenger. Amren mentions how she was bred not to feel emotion. Bred is a really interesting word choice here, especially when she goes on to say that the Lord and her father was a wrathful god who ruled over a young world. Rigelus, the Asteri, we don't know, but I'm really curious to find more out about that. We'll go much more into this particular theory at a later date, because on the same Reddit article, MEGA, who I'm pretty sure we quoted in our Empyrean coverage with a signet theory, basically MEGA, you are on another plane of intelligence, thank you. MEGA mentions the Seraphim theory. The Seraphim are a type of Old Testament angel. There's pulling it back to what Lexi was saying earlier, but they are also known as fire angels. But the seraphim are also thought to be dragons. What does Reese compare Amryn to earlier? A fire drake, aka the German lord dragon who hoards their possessions. As Amryn emerges from the cauldron in ACOTAR, she is, quote, light and fire. Feyre goes on to think, quote, and I could have sworn I saw great burning wings, each feather in a similar ember spread wide. I could have sworn a crown of incandescent light floated just above her flaming hair. Emmy Ego also had pointed out that on the House of Sky and Breath book cover, it is supposed to be Hunt, aka someone who's an angel. What's on the center of his chest? A dragon. We bow to you, Emmy Ego.
When describing the Damati, we learn that they are rare and only appear as the mother wills it. We do know about another Damati in the Maasverse, Rune Danon. In the Crescent City world, it's a limited form of telepathy known as mind speaking. So they're able to talk into each other's minds, but they can't read minds or control minds in the same way that Reese and Feyre can here. It is considered, like I said, a very rare gift. Rune inherited this from his mother, and it is an ability among Avallen Fae, which his mother is descended from, though her family defected from Avallen's court. But Lydia can also speak to others, like Rune, with this mind connection.
Let's move on to Azriel's dagger, aka Truth Teller. Again, another one we are just scraping the surface of today. I have a very short question about Azriel's emotional support dagger, and that is, it is described as, quote, it's dark scabbard embossed with a line of silver runes I never seen before. Silver runes gave me some pause. Feyre later calls it Illyrian runes, but I do wonder if it's another form of word marks. We do know that the Book of Breathings is in word marks, so I'm leaning towards no, but anytime runes come up, I'm like, word marks, fuck!
I think that it is that ancient Fae language. Remember back in the mural in ACOTAR, and the cauldron is pouring its contents out, and it's like this ancient Fae language that we were initially talking about being that ancient Fae language. That's what I assumed here.
But would it be Illyrian?
That's only what Feyre thinks.
True. That's true.
I think that is our unreliable narrator telling us that, when really, let me just get into the story here about Truth Teller. Truth Teller is the twin to Gwydion, and they called to each other, made together with the cauldron's powers. So they were literally made, not necessarily specifically by the cauldron, but with the cauldron's powers. When they are near each other, Truth Teller glows with dark light in response to Gwydion's white light. Gwydion is also known as the Star Sword and was taken to Midgard. So these two twin weapons were separated by worlds, one in the ACOTAR world and the other in Crescent City, which is how Bryce ended up with the Star Sword. And then when she traveled to the ACOTAR world, she brought it with her, and then she borrowed/stole as is Truth Teller so she could keep these two weapons together. Because together... Well, hold on here, because together they have the power to help defeat and overthrow the Daglin, aka the Asteri.
You know what else
and
did? Nesta. You know who killed a Daglin right in front of her? Nesta. It's fine.
Everyone, please go listen to our CC3 reactions for the full rant. This first mention of Az's emotional support dagger, which again is a joke from our CC3 review and rant, it will end up helping destroy the big bad in Crescent City 3. I just love that. Like, here we are in Mist and Fury, and we get a little nugget that is going to play a huge role in the book that came out years later. And I just love how all of this is starting to really tie in together. Anyway, there's so much more I could say on all of this, but we are going to put a pin in this Truth Teller and Gwydion discussion for now and keep on moving. Now, the mists. Ooh, I love this stuff so much. When Feyre arrives at the hike to the prison, she mentions there's mist around her and around this area. We'll talk about the 8th court and the prison a lot next episode, but mist, hello, ley lines hint. From chapter 60 of Crescent City 3, when Adis, prince of the 5th level of hell, is talking about Avallen, quote, the mists are a result of the ley line's power. They're an indication of a thin place. Thin places are where it is easier to world walk and create portals, which makes sense that the 8th court, where Thea, Selene, and Helena left the world to Midgard. Again from Adis, there are ley lines across the whole of the universe. The Asteri have long chosen worlds that are on the ley lines for that exact purpose. It made it easier to move between them to colonize these planets. It will be this misty island where the prison is that Thea and Peleus gather their people willing to conquer and colonize and open the door to Midgard.
Last one is from Throne of Glass with a reference to Lorcan being in Valaris. A perfectly done TikTok by A Court of Thorns and Rosie, we'll put it in the show notes, posted this theory. In chapter 43 of Empire of Storms, quote, Lorcan had seen a kingdom perhaps 300 years ago that relied on barges to sail its good from one end to another. Its name eluded him, lost to the catacombs of his memory. Lorcan wondered if it still existed, tucked away between two mountain ranges on the other side of the world. What are the mountain ranges described as in Valaris? There's two different mountain ranges and a river and boats that I'm assuming are barges to sail. Lorcan could not remember this name because of the magic of Valaris. Now, both Akamath and Empire of Storms came out in the same year, April and September of 2016. So she was working on Akamath, and then probably right after that was Empire of Storms. Yes, it went Queen of Shadows, Akamath, Empire of Storms. So it was most likely, very heavily on her mind with Valaris. And I love this idea of her, just like dropping a hint of like, I just wrote about this city. Let's put that in there. So my headcanon is yes, Lorcan was in Valaris.
But he would have had to somehow world walk in that way, though, because it wasn't just on the other side of their world. It's on the other side of a world.
Who was he serving?
Maeve.
You haven't finished the book, so...
No, I have not, so I don't know what that's...
Okay.
Like I promised, let's kick it off with the Surreal Tea Time Part 2 about the prison. If you don't mind learning about some ACOTAR-related lore that is told in House of Flame and Shadow, please continue. There are no plot spoilers here for House of Flame and Shadow, just lots of lore information as it specifically relates to the ACOTAR world. I know, it's confusing. The prison used to be a royal territory. Queen Thea claimed this island for herself after they defeated the Daglin. It is a naturally defensive location because the mists keep it veiled from the others. And hey, this was indeed the 8th court, the Dusk Court. We get that confirmation. But it was before the courts were divided up and ruled by the High Lords. The island had a soul that blossomed under Queen Thea's care, nurtured by the Dusk Court she built there. But then Thea and her people left to Midgard, and when Selene returned, their home, the island, the Dusk Court, had been left empty since they vanished. The other Fae of Prythian thought it was cursed after the Dusk Fae left, so Selene made it truly cursed. She damned it all, so only the dungeons remained far beneath the mountain. She started hunting the monsters, the remaining pets of the Daglin, until her once beautiful home became a prison. Quote, until even the lands were disgusted by the evil she'd gathered, that the islands shriveled and the earth became barren. I have to wonder if she personally put Amren in the prison. Although the timeline, it doesn't quite line up because Amren entered the prison before High King Theon and his queen Thea ruled, and the prison didn't actually exist until after he was long gone. But we're just going to keep moving past that here. Selene went on to wed the heir to the High Lord of the Night Court, and once he inherited the title and they had their first son, she brought him to the prison and keyed the wards into his blood. She told him the secret of the records she left for him so that he would know about the buried weapon needed against the Daglin that was located beneath the prison. That secret weapon is indeed the harp, but the secret was supposed to be passed down in the generations of the High Lords of the Night Court. But hey, it didn't happen, and somehow along the way, this information got lost and forgotten. This here is the reason Rhys's family has the blood key to the prison. It's because they are ancestors of Selene, who specifically made their blood the key to the prison, where the secret information would be held secret. I'm not entirely sure how Mora's family ruling the Night Court ties into this timeline, since she does not possess the same attributes or appearance as Selene and Rhys, but they are related, so another thing we're not going to touch on here right now. And that, my friends, is the full story about the prison.
Yay, Lexi!
Okay, that concludes part 2 of today's surreal topic. The next part of this Maasverse Madness is still House of Flame and Shadow, but there is going to be a plot spoiler in the mix of this. So I'm saying all of this to be super, super safe. Okay, I'm now diving in. The bone carver mentions that the cauldron fell into the wrong hands and great and horrible things were done with it. Things were forged with it, wicked things, and the cauldron was stolen back at great cost. We already talked about how the Dread Trove, Gwydion, Narbin, and Truth Teller were forged from it, but let's discuss those wrong hands it fell into. In Celine's big download in House of Flame and Shadow, she says that upon arriving to their world, the Daglin, aka the Asteri, captured it and used their powers to warp it. They turned it from what had been into something even deadlier. It was no longer just a tool of creation, remember the cauldron created this world, but also of destruction. The Daglin, aka the Asteri, they produced the Dread Troves with the cauldron. And somehow, Fionn and Thea had made these weapons, and that is why these weapons answered to their power. It does differ from ACOTAR's version, in which the High Priestess dipped the sword into the cauldron and gave it to Fionn. I'm sorry, everyone. I don't know exactly who made it. It's a little bit unclear. Anyway, the Fae fought the Daglin, aka the Asteri, using the Asteri's own weapons, and they won. And these are going to be the same weapons that Bryce will use to defeat the Asteri once and for all.
Someone sent us a DM the other day being like, I feel like you guys are going to have a PhD in Maasverse by the end of these books. And you know what? I agree.
So funny because we're really learning as we go. We did not have all this information beforehand. We knew kind of the general ties, and then we just, I'll say, know where to look. And we still don't get all of it, but man, it is a PhD. It really is.
Let's just put it this way. Thank God for the ebook function search.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Truly. All right, now let's move into our Throne of Glass discussion, which is just going to be a blanket for the whole Throne of Glass series Maasverse crossovers.
So, who is the Weaver? There is a theory outlined by the Random Phantom Gal that the Weaver is the three-faced goddess that is in both Crescent City and Throne of Glass. A few supporting points include the three-faced goddess is Mother, Maiden, and Crone, which does kind of describe the Weaver with her young supple body, voice sweet and beautiful, and skin that's wrinkled and sagging and dry. The three-faced goddess also had a loom, which, duh, the Weaver does too. The ancient Fae actually did think that the Weaver was a god and they worshipped her. So there's that literal sense as well. When the Bone Carver talks about himself and his siblings, including the Weaver, he draws three overlapping interlocked circles. This is the same symbol as the Eye of Elena, a witch symbol of the three-faced goddess, which, by the way, if she's not the three-faced goddess, she could be a witch as well.
Well, on that same note, there is another theory that the Weaver is Vogue, but it also would work if the Weaver was a witch, considering Manon is also part Vogue and along with the other witches. When Feyre throws the chimney brick down on the Weaver, black blood sprays. Alarm, alarm, alarm moment. Book nerd Bree made a comment on a Reddit post that we know the Weaver, like her sibs, are the gods of death. And Maeve is also a descendant from a god. Could Maeve be a very long descent from the Weaver? Possibly. Or heck, completely separate, the Weaver could just be one of the OG Vogue. The Vogue hail from an unnamed home dimension. Some people think that this might be from Hell in CC, but Black Blood is really sus, especially given the fact that SJM was working on Mist and Fury in between Queen of Shadows and Empire of Storms, which are seriously packed with a whole bunch of Vogue shit going down. I'm leaning more towards this rather than the Weaver being related to Maeve, just because of what that means for Mab and Mora. But I love the idea of the Weaver being one of the OG Vogue. Now, would this mean that the Bone Carver and Coast J are also Vogue? Possibly, probably, but also if Maeve is Vogue and Mab and Mora weren't, it doesn't necessarily mean that because one sibling is Vogue, the others are too, just depending on what magic you do. We're not going down that rabbit hole. That's way too much lore. We've already done enough. But I love this idea about the Weaver being one of the OG Vogue. I love this idea about the three-faced goddess. Could it be one and the same?
Yes. Absolutely.
I love
could be.
that.
Yep, it could be. While we're talking about who's who, there is speculation that the Bone Carver is the god of truth based on the Throne of Glass world, or at least they are symbolically parallel. Maureen's wife on Tumblr outlines the similarities. Among them are, in Queen of Shadow, Adian reflects that the god of truth seemed more like a sin eater, and people were supposed to write their horrible sins on the bones of other sinners. It's not unlike the way the bone carver collects bones and carves people's deaths in them. This god of truth from Queen of Shadow is the figure that the Temple of Bone is dedicated to, where people come to confess their awful truths upon the bones of other sinners. Well, Feyre comes and confesses some of her painful truths to the bone carver. So very cool similarities. I don't think that he specifically is that same god of truth, but I love, again, that symbolism between the two.
Well, and again, the timelines. She was working on Queen of Shadows and then immediately went into Mist and Fury, if not working on them a little overlapped while she was doing edits for Queen of Shadows. This is why she's a brilliant woman. Like, how do you keep all of this shit in your head? Does she just have a major wall, or her Bible for the Maasverse must just be insane?
Talk about needing the e-search functionality.
What I wouldn't give to get my hands on that. Do you know how much easier these outlines would be if we had our hands on that Bible? Oh my God.
Well, we're going to put a pin in all of that right now. Again, remember, friends, we are only on episode 4 of ACOMAF. We have a whole lot more to go, and we are just starting to scrape the surface of all the Maasverse Madness stuff.
Let us dive into our second popular theory around Mor. Is Mor a witch? OK Scientist 69, nice, posted on Reddit. There are a number of similarities between Mor and the way that the witches of the Tog series are described. Red in Throne of Glass is associated with that of the Kraken witches. Red, as we discussed earlier, is a color that Mor wears regularly. Mor's power also manifested at her first period, similar to our witches. Quality Garbage X, these are perfect names. I love it.
The Reddit usernames are my favorite.
God, it's quality humor. Commented on the same Reddit post about how in mythology, the Morgan is often considered a triple goddess. Who do the witches in the Tog universe worship? The three-faced goddess. Most witches also cannot wield magic. That is until they do the yielding. Maybe this is why we haven't seen Mor's powers on full display outside of like healing and winnowing. However, I will say the Kraken witches are the exception. More on this in a moment. Guava Fox on the same Reddit post also commented that Mor was also marked on her belly just as Asterin was, which is a sad comparison. And last but not least on this Reddit article, C Girl pulled the quote, "Mor is who I call in when the armies fail and Cassian and Azriel are both dead. Could this be because she is capable of the yielding, which we see to devastating lengths in Kingdom of Ash?" I will not say more because Lexi has not read that book yet.
I still need to read this damn book.
I need you to read it so I can fully talk about it, because that is something I will not spoil for you. I refuse. Still on this subject, though, I want to move back to the Kraken witches connection, because for this, I had to call in reinforcements, and I mean literally call. So thank you, Lauren from Book Huddle, who spent 30 minutes on the phone with me and then another 2 days sending articles back and forth to pull this together. Legitimately, most of these are her findings. She's a genius. We love Lauren on this podcast. 500 years ago, when the Witch Wars happened, the Kraken witches were thus scattered across the continent, and they searched for the one Kraken witch who could reverse the curse placed on the Witch Kingdom. The curse was placed on the Witch Kingdom by the last Kraken queen 500 years ago. This 500-year timeline really stood out. What if Mor's mother was the Kraken queen, Rhiannon Kraken I? Rhiannon, the name, translates to divine queen. Morgan, the name, translates to phantom queen. In A Court of Frost and Starlight, when Mor is greeted by Keir, she thinks, quote, "The sneering tone, she could still hear the hissed insults behind it, whispered long ago in her family's private suite, whispered at every meeting and gathering when her cousin was not present," her cousin meaning Rhys. "Half-breed monstrosity, a disgrace to the bloodline." We of course assume that they're talking about Rhys, yes, but could they also be talking about Mor as a half-breed monstrosity of a witch and a high fae? At the end of this book, the Kingdom of Hybern says to Mor, quote, "What a mighty queen you are," and Mor slowly backs away at these words. That could tie back into her power and her name literally meaning phantom queen, Or it could tie into her blood lineage through the Kraken line if her mother was the last Kraken queen. Other notes on the Kraken, they are known to be peaceful and beautiful, taking much more after their Fae ancestors rather than their Volg. Because they take after their Fae ancestors, this also means that they are able to use more magic. For example, Rhiannon Kraken II, who Manon kills, she inherited magical abilities unique to the Krakens, one of which being able to glamour. But what if other magical abilities unique to the Krakens include truth? Rhiannon Kraken I in the Witch Mirror flashback is described as looking just like Manon, of course, tying us into what happens to Manon in Kingdom of Ash. But she, Rhiannon Kraken I, has a crown of stars in this flashback, a symbol we highly associate with the Night Court. This is only part one of this crack theory and will be continued when we get to the Veritas Orb, but because Lauren sent me something that quite literally blew my mind, I will tell you off air, Lex. And here are my personal thoughts on this theory. I love this. I think it would be a really powerful way of tying the Tog world and the ACOTAR world, especially. There might be some things that we find, especially as we go through ACO War and stuff like that. And especially for a character like Moore, who is more mysterious. And I think that it would be just so cool if it ties those two worlds together.
So now a few more quick Throne of Glass and Crescent City 3 things. Feyre notes how Valaris is misty. Now you might be like, well, that's just the weather. Hold on. We've discussed the mist around the prison, but the mist in Valaris is very important given that it's one of the first things Bryce notices when she arrives. And we have to wonder, why does Bryce arrive in Valaris in the first place instead of one of the other nearby thin places like the prison? We learn in CC3 that mist equals thin places that are easier to travel to. So while we have never gotten a direct comparison about Valaris being a thin place, this is something to really and truly be on the lookout for because there are a lot of little pieces that are falling into place here.
In Rhys's Darkness is What You Make of It speech, he says that there is the darkness of assassins. I love this subtle nod to Selena Sardathian and her morally gray nature as a protagonist. As our crew frequents Rita's, you also cannot help but think of Asriel loving most of Bryce's music from the bonus chapter of CC3. Asriel is described as being on board with the, quote, pulsing thumping of club music. He's asking her again to play the, quote, pleasure hall music. It does make me wonder what kind of music they play at Rita's, because if the like pulsing club music that Bryce shows him is something he's like, oh, this is fun and interesting, but like, what do they play at Rita's?
The piano version of the unsu, 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 unsu. I don't know.
It's the violin version of Get Low, actually. Friends,
all right, friends, we need to stop this right now. We are getting delirious. Today, we are discussing Crescent City and Throne of Glass lore. So if you've only read ACOTAR before you leave, next episode, we will be covering chapters 38 through 43. And of course, if you want more Fantasy Fangirls, please do join the Patreon party. It is so helpful. You can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Fantasy Fangirls Pod.
Side note, yes, next episode is the throne scene, and I'm so excited. I cannot wait. You can also rate and review the podcast. This is one of the best things that you can do for any and all podcasts that you listen to, and it takes 2 seconds. And the most important thing, the cream of the crop, if you will, please share this episode with your fellow ACOTAR and ACOMAF friends.
All right, we are now entering our Maasverse Madness segment of the episode, where we call out series crossover references and discuss theories. Today includes spoilers for both series, Crescent City and Throne of Glass. So if you have not finished those series, we will see you next week.
Lead being the tomb of the Asteri. We mentioned earlier this quote, lead to keep the full force in, to preserve it. They used to line the sarcophagi of the great rulers with it because they thought one day they'd awaken. Immediately, if you're like me, you thought of the Asteri, who Bryce found in Crescent City at the bottom of the prison in Prythian. But alas, that tomb, I guess is a good word for it, was not made of lead. It was instead made of crystal. So I don't know if Amren's talking about a great ruler, a different great ruler, like Lexi mentioned earlier, or if this is just a forgotten lore point in the Maasverse, which honestly either is possible.
I was like, oh my gosh, I bet it was the Asteri, and I bet she was in a lead tomb. And then I went down to the Maasverse Madness and was like, nope, you already looked up, and it was crystal. And I was like, oh,
right? I was like,
I thought it was going to be a different answer.
I thought it was going to be the same thing, but alas, nope, it was crystal.
Here's just a tiny one. In one of the summer court troves, Feyre sees dresses woven of cobwebs and starlight leaned against one another. These dresses of cobwebs immediately made me think of spider silk in the Tog universe. I have no idea if that's right, but that's what it made me think of.
I was thinking the exact same thing, and that was my moment of, oh my god, I bet this is the spider silk, and I went down to the Maasverse Madness, and you had already put that in there, so I love it.
It's the same thing where we both literally wore Hawaiian shirts today without talking to each other about it.
I love it. Last but not least, the whorls on the door into the temple. On both of the doors into the chamber for the Book of Breathings, there are carved whorls along the door. Feyre activates both of the doors using her Tarquin fingerprint magic, but after the doors close and all hell breaks loose, Amryn is the one who heats the metal and, quote, swirls and whirls, radiating out through it as if they were a language all her own. So, are these word marks? However, we also get another mystery language in this episode with the Book of Breathings that I was under the impression were word marks. However, we know these two symbolic languages are not the same because when Amryn sees the symbols on the door, she's like unfazed, not surprised. But when she sees the language in the Book of Breathings, she goes wholly still at the Lashon HaKodesh, aka the Holy Tongue. This is also the same language that is tattooed on Bryce's back with "Through love, all is possible," which many people believed were word marks. However, none of that is confirmed canon. So which of these, the door and the Book of Breathings, which of these are word marks, if either of them even are? To answer this, I went to our Maasverse Madness Master List channel on our Discord. Yes, it exists, and it's probably one of my favorite channels on there. So huge shout out to the hive mind of people who helped me with this. I love you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Here is what we know. Amryn said the Lashon HaKodesh is no language of this world. The Daglin/Asteri created this language, which we learn from Rigelis in chapter 96 of A House of Flame and Shadow. This was created from their home world. So Amryn says that it's not of the Prythian world, and Rigelis says it's of their home world. So we can assume that this is the Tog world of Aurelia, which is the Asteri's home world. Which I thought it is. I thought it was Prythian. So I was like, wait, what? That's only if
I didn't think it was Prythian either. I thought they had a whole other world of their own, and then they went and infiltrated these other two worlds.
So it could be. It's not confirmed that it's from Aurelia. I assumed that because we're working with 3 different worlds here. If it's not from the first 2, then it would be from the third one. But it could be from a totally different one. Maybe the main point of Twilight of the Gods. We have no idea. We also know from the Underking in CC3 that when Ethan is talking to him about the Shifter world, which his line of Fae hailed from, quote, this is, oh my God, this gave me chills, quote, the cauldron of life, brimming with the language of creation, Erd, they call her here, the bastardization version of her true name, Word, we called her in that old world. So Word equals Erd equals cauldron/the mother, which I didn't know until this episode of the deep dive, which I'm a little ashamed to say because that's like a huge Maasverse moment. So these are obviously 2 different languages, like I mentioned earlier. And if the mother Erd word created word marks, which based on the name alone, word marks from word, that makes sense. Which would mean that the Book of Breathings is not in word marks because the Daglin/Asteri created the language that the Book of Breathings is written in. So because of that, I'm inclined to think that the swirls and whirls on the doors that Amryn activates with heat press magic, basically, that is word marks in here in our ACOTAR world. Also, they're described as swirls and whirls, which is how Selena describes them in the first talk book. But while we're on this whole Book of Breathings situation, and I hope you're still with me, this is not the only series that the Book of Breathings is mentioned in. In Crescent City 1, right before Micah does his big old evil villain monologue and then gets vacuumed up by Bryce. Amazing. Bryce's inner monologue says, quote, Micah loomed over her. She stretched her arm out towards the shelf. Her tingling fingers brushed over the titles. On the Divine Number, The Walking Dead, The Book of Breathings, The Queen of Many Faces, ... How did the Book of Breathings end up in Jessica's library in Crescent City 1? We will discuss that at a later date because, yes, we have some theories. But also, side note, yes, The Walking Dead is from Throne of Glass, also in Jessica's library. Wow. Whew. It is time to extend my is more a witch theory. In case you missed it, I, along with our friend Lauren from Book Huddle, went down a rabbit hole around the possibility of more being a witch from Tog, specifically a Kraken witch from Tog. If you want to listen to the entire deep dive of the theory, we have it in episode 5's Maasverse Madness section. But it is time to extend that theory with the Veritas Orb. This is full credit to Lauren because she's incredible and she caught this and she texted it to me and my mouth just dropped open. Moore says, quote, "This is the Veritas, the gift of my first ancestor to our bloodline." This line, the gift of my first ancestor to our bloodline, implies that the ancestor is different from their current bloodline. Could this be a gift from a Kraken witch bloodline, like we mentioned in episode 5? So the foundation of this Veritas orb is, could this be a witch mirror? Witch mirrors have immense power in the Throne of Glass world and have various uses depending on the mirror in question. Some can see the future, some can see the past, some can see the present, but all witch mirrors are made out of a rare silver. The Veritas Orb also made out of silver. So was Moore's family gifted the Veritas Orb from her possible witch bloodline? Maybe. The more and more I look into it, I'm like, please God, let this be true. I love this theory so much because I think it would clear up so much of the question marks around Moore. But that's it. Short and sweet. Friends, we're done. Let's get to them finding out their mates. I'm so excited. We have to discuss Starfall and why it disturbs Amren. On a Reddit post by Yanni77, future underscore Kotara mentioned an idea. We know that in Kingdom of Ash, Aelin leaps through the word gate and starts falling between worlds. One of the worlds she falls through is Valaris on Starfall, as if she was a star. Quote, I'm quoting the whole damn thing because it gave me chills. I screamed in the car when I was reading this. Quote, "She passed through the world of snow-capped mountains under shining stars, passed over one of those mountains where a winged male stood beside a heavily pregnant female, gazing at those very stars." In this scene, Aelin flings her hand out in a plea to help slow her down because she's zooming by all of these worlds, and Rhys snaps his head up to look at her and blasts night slowing power in her direction. Also, fun note, as Aelin is falling, she also sees Lunathian. Quote, "She passed through a world where a great city had been built along the curve of a river, the buildings impossibly tall and glimmering with lights." SJM has confirmed that is Lunathian. So back to Amren. What if Amren fell through worlds just like Aelin had, likely with the same lack of control? And that's why it disturbs her? That could very well be the thing. However, Amren is at Starfall in a court of frost and starlight, which is a starfall that Aelin falls through because Feyre is pregnant. We can assume that that's the one, unless Feyre has another pregnancy, so we don't know. But why this date specific? Is this a time manipulation thing? Like, people are falling through the worlds all the time, but it always just happens to be on Starfall in Prythian. I don't really know how that would work. I don't know how to even explain it into a microphone without confusing myself. Also, why did Aelin appear on Starfall falling through a gate, but Bryce didn't when she fell through a gate when traveling to Prythian? I have no idea. I have 0.0% idea, but I do think that maybe one of the reasons Amren has distaste for Starfall is because she had a very similar experience to Aelin. While we're still on Tog, there is a Bloodbane parallel. When Rhys is poisoned and the Suriel says to Feyre the poison was Bloodbane, that is the same poison that Kaltain slips into Celena's wine at the final fight against Cain in the first Throne of Glass book. This is also the drug she missed on her poison test.
That's a really fun fact there.
Brett and I are listening to Tog right now because he's making his way through that series, and we were in the final scene with Cain and it said Bloodbane, and I literally dropped everything and ran to my laptop and wrote this down. I was very excited.
When Feyre is experimenting with her powers and melding them to work together, she describes, quote, "They had come from the same dark origin, the same eternal well of power, once long ago, before language was invented and the world was new." This well language immediately reminded me of the descriptions in the Tog world with the deep power within oneself. It is frequently used as Aelin discovers just how deep her well of magic goes. Understanding that these Fae come from different worlds but within the same universe, I love how there are those little ties into how magic as a whole does indeed work similarly.
And friends, that is it for today's episode. I have a quick one before I get into the one I'm literally shaking to get to. I'm so excited. The first one is Moore in the cabin when she is joining Feyre in painting. She paints 3 stick figures on the wall that look, quote, just like her. The Morgan in Celtic mythology represents 3 sisters, but here, Moore in the cabin, she's also painting, 3 similar looking women on the wall. Who do the witches in Tog worship? The 3-faced goddess. So I do wonder if that is more of a witch parallel with Morgan, or if it's more of a nod to Morgan in Celtic mythology and her roots there. But I like to think it's a witch nod because I'm so sold on that theory. I can't even tell you. Now, we need to talk about mating bonds in the other Maasverse series. We have learned all about mating bonds in the Prythian world, but what about the other 2 worlds? In Throne of Glass, when Aelin and Rowan, I'll call it solidify their mating bond, there is a moment where they bite each other's neck. And given that these Fae in Aurelia are so much more primal, more animalistic than our Prythian Fae, it does make sense. In Kingdom of Ash, quote from Aelin's perspective, mate, the word still sounded like a surprise. What they had done in that forest pool had been accumulation of those months and an unleashing. The mating marks on her neck and on Rowan's proved it. She would not be returning to Terrasen alone when autumn arrived. So we can assume that the mating bond snapping into place is more of like, I should say, is more emotional, just like it is with Rhys and Feyre. But I'm assuming that the mating mark on their necks is more of the soup in the Prythian world. It's more symbolic of like, I claim you. We also have in their Caranon bond scene, that could have also been where their bond snaps into place. They could tap into each other's powers, which we'll talk about more in a second. And in that scene in Heir of Fire, Rowan says, quote, I claim you too, Aelin Galathynius. It's very much along that you're mine language. So their mating bond might have actually snapped into place in Heir of Fire without either of them knowing for obvious reasons. We as the reader don't learn until the end of Empire of Storms. But in the end of Empire of Storms, when Maeve is doing her huge download of, I made Rowan believe that this other woman was his mate, but it was actually you all along, Aelin thinks how she's actually known since Rowan got hurt in Queen of Shadows, and she goes absolutely feral, very similar to how Feyre acts when Rhys is hurt. Now, but again, it's not the mating bond snapping into place. It's when she realizes, oh my God, this man who's already had a mate is actually my mate. What the hell? And then obviously we learn everything at the end of Empire of Storms.
So now let's look at the Crescent City world and how mating bonds work there. It's a little bit like, we're mates. In all seriousness, though, it is not quite as primal or soul binding as the other 2 Maas worlds.
Now, they do have their laying in bed, I don't know, maybe we're mates conversation while we're discussing mating bonds in all of the Maasverse. On the boat, Bryce and Hunt consummating the mating bond is when it officially, they don't use this language, but it's when it officially clicks, I'll say. Quote, they filled with iridescent light. He filled with light. They both fill with light of the starborn Fae, which got me thinking. Actually, not thinking. I legit gasped reading this part of the book, so much so that Brett was in the kitchen and I was at the counter, and he turned around like he needed to fight a bear for me. Like he was so afraid that something happened. In chapter 55 of A Court of Mist and Fury, Feyre glows, quote, warm white like the sun, like a star. And Rhys is a descendant of Thea, the starborn Fae line. Could this glow technically be a gift from Rhys? The like a star language is so interesting here. From Celine's download in House of Flame and Shadow, she had a son with the High Lord of the Night Court, aka her mate, and she bound that son to the Dusk Court prison. Quote from Celine, no one knew that infant who sometimes glowed with starlight had inherited it from me, and that it was the light of the evening star, the Dusk Star. When Feyre asks Rhys if her glow was from the Day Court, he says, quote, I don't care. Now, it's not like, I don't care. It's like, I don't care. I'm so in love with you right now. That's not on my mind. He doesn't confirm it. So when Feyre says about Helion and Akawar, quote, his powers that made me glow whenever Rhys and I were tangled with each other, and every heartbeat ached with mirth. This also just might be her assumption, because later in chapter 55, Feyre thinks, quote, I think the light pouring out of me might have been starlight. I think these are Rhys's powers. I don't think these are Helion's.
I'm so excited as we are introduced to Helion, because I honestly just can't remember if he does have that glowing possibility. I know that he does like emanate sunlight and all of that, but I'm going to be so curious about the language because I love that you're so right about that starlight language there and how she's glowing like a star and the starborn fae. And yep.
The thing that locked this into place for me is the Celine download.
Yes.
No one knew the infant that sometimes glowed like a star with starlight. Literally, Feyre says, the powers within me might have been starlight. Like, it's the same word. I want to start with talking about the symphony music. So the music at the symphony that Cassian and Feyre go to had music that was strange and, quote, written at a time when humans had not even walked this earth. I could not help but think about the music that Selena sings when she is looking up at the sky after Nehemiah's death, and she sings in a ancient Fae language, the songs that people of Terrasen used to sing, only nobility of Terrasen used to sing when someone died. I do not think it's the same song, I should note, but given the description from Chaol's point of view, it's very similar. So I wonder if this music necessarily came from the Fae in the Tog world versus Prythian.
I like that.
I do too. This is really not a spoiler. This is more of a clarification. I didn't know this until I got the ebooks of Throne of Glass because I've always been listening to the audiobooks, which are phenomenal. Elizabeth Evans, you're incredible. But several times in Throne of Glass, it is mentioned, quote, mean as an adder. Adder is spelled A-D-D-E-R versus our A-T-T-O-R in Prythian. So adder is not the adder, like the bat-like creature in our world. An adder, a D-D-E-R, is actually a venomous type of snake. I did not know that until this week. So, which brings up the question, though, if an adder in the Tog world is a version of the Ilkin. They're described really similar. However, Ilkin do have black blood and are half human, half, according to Lorcan, whatever Erewhon did to them. And the adders in Prythian have silver blood, and they are a type of fae. So I think it is safe to say that they are two different things.
Let's go back to Amren's warning about putting the two halves of the Book of Breathings together and how that would draw enemies far older and more wretched, things that have long been asleep and should remain so. I mentioned already that maybe she's talking of the Daglin, aka the Asteri. And while they were overthrown in this world, we know that they did not all leave. That at least under the prison for 15,000 years, there has indeed been a sleeping Asteri encased in a crystal coffin. Vespers, in particular, was trapped by Thea under the prison, but it's possible that she is not the only one still lurking underground in all of Prythian. Now, she did say that they have pockets of power hidden beneath the sacred mountains in Prythian. That's not creatures or enemies, but there are definitely Asteri-related mysteries under these mountains laying dormant.
Feyre describes humans in this stretch as, quote, laced with earth and marrow and rot, mortality. Tell us how you really feel, Feyre. You cannot help but think about this as a little nudge to earth and blood, aka one of the houses in Crescent City, and it's also the house that humans reside in. Not to mention, this is not the first mention of earth and blood when it comes to humans. From ACOTAR, Book 1, when Feyre is back in the human realm, she describes the human servants as, quote, unfinished graceless creatures, Jesus, of earth and blood. There it is.
Well, she was even a human back then, too.
What a jackass. And then during the summer solstice, here we go, Feyre does her little glowing trick. And again, it's described as starlight. SJM is just fucking with me at this point, I swear to God. In case you do not know what I'm talking about, back in our coverage of Akamath, I mentioned how I do not think these glowy powers of Feyre's are from the Day Court, or at least not entirely from the Day Court, but instead they are from Rhys, who is a starborn Fae descendant. From the Selene download in A House of Flame and Shadow, she had a son with the High Lord of the Night Court, which was her mate, and she bound her son to the Dusk Court prison. Quote, no one knew that infant who sometimes glowed with starlight had inherited it from me, that it was the light of the evening star, the dusk star. So she technically has powers from all 8 courts, we should say, because technically this is a dusk court power. Several times in Akamath chapter 55, Feyre thinks about her glowing, quote, I think the light pouring out of me might have been starlight. And here in this chapter stretch, we get another instance of her calling it starlight. Super powerful starborn curse breaker Feyre Archeron. And then we have Nesta, who had the 8-pointed star tattooed on her back from her bargain with Cassian, where it's like, who knows what she's about to go off to, but then her sister has the powers of the descent. Like,
what if Feyre uses that power, kind of like how people use it for Bryce to, like, you know, charge her up, and Feyre has that ability to do that for her sister. Wait. But Nesta doesn't have that tattoo anymore.
No, it went away when she and Cassian.
That's right.
Oh,
man, I thought I was onto something there.
So good.
We can't bring up the Autumn Court in this episode without talking about the Autumn King from the Crescent City series. During Celine's mega download in House of Flame and Shadow, she explained how her mother wanted to open a portal from the ACOTAR world and conquer a new world to bring the Fae to new heights, new wealth, and prestige. But most people in her court refused because they just defeated the Daglin, aka the Asteri, and we're like, we're good here, no more conquering. Except, quote, there were enough Fae throughout her lands, along with some of the fire wielders from the south who supported the idea. In one of the holograph visuals, Bryce sees red-haired Fae that look alarmingly like her father, the Autumn King, being greeted in Midgard by the Asteri. So from this, we understand the Autumn Court Fae, or at least some of them, traveled through realms with Thea from the Dusk Court to Midgard. So there is that obvious connection between the Autumn Court and the Autumn King's lineage. There are a lot of questions about who exactly the Autumn King is. Based on the timelines, I don't think it's possible for Baron to be the Autumn King, as some theorize. Bryce lives in a world 15,000 years in the future. So Baron being here alive right now, his ancestors, he would have had to travel there 15,000 years ago. So this, I really think it's more of just a subtle nod versus a crazy theory about the Autumn King being someone we know from this world. Just to continue a little bit further on that, there is a theory that Eris is the Autumn King. However, timelines aside, the fact that the Autumn King tortures Rune just like Baron has done to Eris, I like to think that Eris is a better person than turning into his father when he's trying not to be in this series. The Autumn King is also obsessed with planets in the universe as he searches for patterns to lead him to finding and traveling to their Fae homeworld, this world in ACOTAR. So I just found that very interesting there. And that's all I got there for Maasverse today.
I am curious how Bryce got the Starborn Fae powers.
I started going down that rabbit hole and I pulled out because that's a whole other topic. There is actually a theory, though, that she did get it from Ember. And Ember is a distant lineage from Thea because the Bone Carver says that there is mortals who have that Fae lineage there. So instead of it being the Archerons, like we've been assuming, it could actually be Ember in a different world.
Okay. I like it. But then how would Rune also have the Starborn Fae
He
powers?
would get it from his mother, who is on the Avalon side. We do know that he did get it from his mother,
yes,
because their father specifically is not Starborn. So he would have had to get that from his mother. So that's where the question is, where how did Bryce get it?
That's for a different day. We should also note that we are talking about a world-building topic in Throne of Glass. So my first one is really actually more of a theory, I'm going to call it. When Amren says to Nesta, quote, "When you erupt, girl, make sure it is felt across worlds." I'm sorry, is that plural? Worlds? Do you think that this is foreshadowing? Like, considering that we know that Nesta's story is not done. She had the 8-pointed star on her back. Bryce is like, go figure out what that means. Do you think that she's going to have a sacrifice of some sort to erupt? Do you think that this is a yielding of monumental destruction? Because especially if the Archerons do have some witch blood in their veins, they could perform the yielding. Let's move on to the Humans with Magic download, because wow, I'm getting more and more convinced that Feyre is a Starborn Fae descendant, because what if she is somehow in Thea's descendant line, but she was half Fae, half, like, her ancestor was half Fae, half mortal. But that's how she has her Starborn powers. Now, she also could have gotten them from Rhys, but now we have so much more insight on how the humans from Throne of Glass, but like, humans can have magic in Throne of Glass. So like, we do know that there's now more of a connection between the humans in these two worlds. But then also, like, some of the humans in Midgard probably have magic, but the fucking parasite is just diminishing their magic. But Rhys says in this library...
Well, the humans in Midgard were already there when all of the Fae and stuff came over.
Oh,
so those
right.
humans could be like us humans.
Or they could be like Tog and / or maybe the ACOTAR humans and have magic, but they can't use it because of the parasite.
But the other worlds, those humans would have had to come over from those worlds, but the CC humans were already there.
But if some humans came over from Tog, we don't know about any that came over from ACOTAR, but if some humans came over from Tog, then they would have magic and maybe they bred with the other humans, so now there's just a bunch of diluted magic.
That's absolutely possible, but we do know that no humans came over from the ACOTAR world.
That is true. We do. That is
Yes.
accurate. Reese says in this library download, though, he says, quote, some of those spells don't require magic from the wielder, only the right words or use of ingredients. Not said here, word marks, I believe.
Yeah, which is exactly how humans can use magic in the Tog world.
Exactly.
And then last thing here, again, we will get a lot more into this when we go through Silver Flames, but that fourth Dread Trove item that we were talking about that has the age-worn bone that Nesta can see from what Lanthus projects. It's the horn, folks. It's the horn that is currently in Midgard and that Danica had, and then she essentially entrusted to Bryce. And there you
she
go.
tattooed it on her fucking back is what she did.
Yeah, the same thing. Entrusted it to Bryce, you know.
Against her will, entrusted it to her.
Just sneaky.
Sneaky.
And then also, we're just going to save our Maasverse library theories for another time. There is so much that we could talk about with the libraries. And I'm just going to be honest with you. We just came back from LeakyCon. It has been quite the week for us. We kind of lost a day, and we will talk about that at a different time when I have more brain power. All right. We are now officially entering our Maasverse Madness segment of the episode. Nicole's literally stretching as she prepares for this.
Yeah, honestly.
All right, let's continue our discussion about the old gods. Are the old gods connected to the Daglin, who we know are the Asteri and maybe the Volg? I know that's a little bit questionable there. The Daglin would drink magic like fine wine, like I mentioned earlier, and the Asteri require first light during the drop. So that would equate to them feeding off life forces like these death gods.
There's also the Asteri having the second light from people who are in the bone quarter and like move on, basically. So they have first light and second light.
And that could equate to them feeding off life forces in a similar fashion as these death gods. There are also different levels of Volg. So I wonder if the Asteri are, I'll call it the most powerful Volg or an evolved version of the Volg, and the old gods are more like their minions, kind of like the lesser levels of the Volg there. I don't know if that makes any sense, but...
No, it does. It does. And I love the idea of them, the Asteri and the Daglin, being evolved versions of the Volg, which we'll get into the supporting evidence for that in a second. But when you say like the old gods are almost like their minions, I imagine them, the old gods, being much more powerful than like a Volg prince, for instance, assuming that they are Volg or even Volg adjacent. I will say this, it is very sus because Kostje has a black box that is like super precious to like my precious to him. Is this some kind of Volg black ring, black collar situation, but just in box form that he has? Potentially.
Interesting. Well, let's get into some of our supporting evidence about how the old gods are connected to the Daglin and the Asteri and possibly the Volg. Lanthus and the Weaver bleed black blood. There. The Volg and the Asteri have black blood too. Remember that the one Asteri who was killed in the prison, she bleeds black blood. So the fact that Lanthus and the Weaver also do, I feel like that means that it's a dead giveaway that they are all connected.
Which, side note, I thought of this earlier and I couldn't say it. When Nesta kills Vesperus in the prison in Crescent City 3, we mentioned earlier how Nesta is almost like a amalgamation of Gwydion, like a Gwydion-esque sword, like the power of the cauldron and the power of an old god. She puts her power into Ataraxia, which then kills Vesperus. So there's another instance of Nesta having the power of the cauldron to be able to kill the Asteri, Daglin, / maybe Volg.
Yes, because she is almost like the bridge between the cauldron and creating these weapons, because she has that same cauldron power essence that then she transmits into these made objects. Exactly. Another point, again, talking about Lanthus, is that he looks a lot like Erewhon when he was conjured in a human form. Not saying they're the same individual whatsoever, but I gotta love these similar appearances that they can form into.
We should note not when he was Parrington, but when he's like Erewhon 2.0.
Yes, exactly.
Definitely
like
not when
the
he was
blonde
Parrington.
man. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And another point, the bone carver wants the Ouroboros mirror, and that had belonged to his sister, the Weaver. Maeve told Aelin that her kind had taught witches to use mirrors. So there's another possible connection.
Well, and I 100% believe that the Ouroboros is some kind of witch mirror. From the Tog Wiki, quote, witch mirrors are mirrors with immense power that have various uses depending on the type of mirror in question. Sounds about right. Now, there is that moment where the bone carver is like, my sister was once a queen. Could he be referring to a Vogue queen? Right?
Ah.
Now,
All right.
would that be Maeve or someone else? I don't think it would be
it's
Maeve.
the exact same characters. I think that as we talk about the multiverse, there aren't so many of the exact same characters as the same types of characters and such.
Agreed.
Let's continue another discussion about who the ancient Fae female warrior is. The bone carver describes her as, quote, clever, that Fae warrior. Her bloodline is long gone now, though a trace still runs through some human line. No one remembers her name, but I do. She would have been my salvation had I not made my choice long before she walked this earth. So we already speculated in today's ACOTAR coverage who this warrior was, but I'm going to build on it being Thea, who is Fion's queen. Her name is never said in ACOTAR, so here we are saying it here. It's Thea. She was one of the High Fae who defeated the Daglin. Now, I will say part of the bone carver's description doesn't fit for her because he says no one remembers her and her bloodline definitely continues through the High Lord of the Night Court.
I do wonder if he's referring to how the bloodline maybe at one point split, and he's referring to the split half of the bloodline that went to the human side. So if at one point it did split and go to the human side, I do have something to build off of that, though, is because in Celine's download, she mentions Thea, quote, being blessed by the gods themselves. If I texted this to you and I was like, holy shit, like I freaked out. If the bloodline is like, let's say, for instance, through the Archerons, this would be a huge clue to their power boosters, that I'll say. But also this means that Rhys, as a descendant of Thea, who was blessed by the gods themselves, would also, you know, explain why he is super powerful. I'm just saying, coincidence? I don't think so. Yes, I do think that with this meaning all of them stem from Thea, that does mean that Rhys and Feyre are distantly related. If Rowan and Aelin can do it, so can fucking Rhys and Feyre. I don't like, it's distant enough, it's fine.
Well, and according to the timeline we have, it couldn't be Celine either, although she was the one who rounded up the Daglin's pets and trapped them in the prison. Technically, Amren went to the prison before it was actually a prison, since she went in before High King Fion's reign when the Dust Court flourished, which is what the prison used to be. And we know that the Bone Carver went into the prison before Amren. So technically, the Bone Carver and Amren were in the prison, not yet a prison, before Fion was defeated, before Thea took her people to Midgard, and before Celine came back to a Prythian with High Lords, and she proceeded to trap the monsters and create the prison.
We need a timeline, a visual timeline. I feel like this is crazy.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that there are inconsistencies in the timeline. Like, I would love to create one, but I think I would actually go crazy because there are these inconsistencies here. Anyway,
Okay,
there's also speculation that this ancient Fae female warrior was Aelin.
Which I love this theory. However, I don't think they're talking about Aelin because they mention how she was on this world. So I definitely do think they're talking about Thea. Now, he is saying that the ancient female warrior's bloodline is running through a human line. While not technically human, he could be referring to Lydia in Midgard. And Aelin's bloodline is running through her, but she's technically a shifter. So I don't know if that might be a bit of a stretch. Another Crescent City option for this human bloodline, though, is actually, if this is not the Archeron, this is my number 2 theory. If the human,
I do think that it is Archeron, and I don't think it is somebody that we actually know. But come on, we got to theorize.
Oh, you don't think it's someone we actually? I think it's Thea, and then the Archerons.
Oh, but how nobody remembers her bloodline? That's,
he said how nobody remembers her bloodline, but I do.
Correct. And Thea's bloodline goes through the High Lords.
But I think he's referring to the split bloodline where it splits into the humans.
Okay, that's actually a really good point.
Now, here's just to throw a new wrench in it, like taking the Archerons completely off the board. Could he be referring to Bryce's mother's human bloodline, the Quinlan bloodline? Since we know that Rune got his starborn Fayness from his mother, not the Autumn King, that would have to mean that Bryce got starborn powers through Ember. If Thea is indeed this Fey warrior, that would mean that the Quinlan bloodline could be the distant Fae,
Yes.
running through it.
Yes.
Or hell, it could be both, which means that it would be Feyre, Archeron, Elaine, Nesta, and Bryce all being distantly related to the Starborn Fae bloodline.
Which would make total sense because of the
Right?
8-pointed star. Oh my God,
Yes,
I
it
have chills.
would.
I think we just figured it out. Like, okay, that's canon to me now. Yep. Yep.
All right, let's go into the Bone Carver, because there's many a theory wondering if he is not Nyx, who this Bone Carver could possibly be with the crushing blue eyes and the raven black hair. And there are people wondering if this could be Rune or Dorian. I'm going to talk about Rune because that seems to be the more popular one, especially since Bryce mentions at the end of Crescent City 2 how when Rhys walks in, she's like, oh my God, it's Rune. And then she realizes it's not Rune. I love this idea. I think it would be so cool if we've actually been seeing Rune this entire time. However, Feyre sees her own mouth or her father's mouth in the boy. So unless there's like a wild plot twist where Feyre is like, where time is being warped and Rune is actually Feyre and Rhys's son, I think we can confidently say that it is not Rune. Please do not make it Rune. That would hurt my head so badly. I love it. I love the idea. But if Feyre and Rhys are actually Rune's parents, that would be wild considering Rune's like 84. Anyway, so if we're looking at the Bone Carver as a whole, I want to back up a little bit because Sarah Kane Reads has an incredible video on TikTok, and we'll link it in the show notes. This theory was brought about because the Bone Carver has some different motives than his two out for blood siblings. In Sarah's video, she notes how with each interaction with him, our crew has to offer up a bone, and then they get to ask him all the questions they want, except for sometimes. But there's one rule. Never lie to the Bone Carver. In each interaction, they will share basically a truth for a truth, unless you're Feyre and Rhys and Akamath and you're still owed 2 more truths. It's fine. I'm clearly over it. What if the Bone Carver is actually a god of truth, aka the Sin Eater from Throne of Glass? As Sarah Kane Reads points out on TikTok, in Queen of Shadows, the Sin Eater's temple is filled with bones of confessions written on them. We know that the Sin Eater was a godlike being. So is this the Bone Carver, or are they similar in some way? Again, not saying that they're the same person, but they're almost adjacent titles. But Sarah adds to this theory because the Bone Carver explains that his home world is no more than a dust drifting across a plain. Then he draws 3 interlocking circles in the dirt. And if you're like, that sounds familiar, it's because it is the same design as the Archesian amulet that Bryce gets from Jessica. So in House of Sky and Breath, Apollyon, aka the Prince of the Pit, takes Bryce in a dream to a, quote, vast dusty plain, which is exactly how the Bone Carver describes his home world. But Apollyon takes her to not what he calls the home world, he calls it Parthos, or at least what remains of Parthos, which, yes, that is where Jessica took all of the books from before it fell, which in Parthos, the Archesian amulets, those 3 interlocking circles, are what the priestesses wore. It is described exactly the same as how the Bone Carver draws on the floor. So is the Bone Carver's homeworld Parthos? Now, I do want to point out that if this ancient Fey warrior's bloodline is indeed the Quinlan bloodline, the Bone Carver is literally drawing Bryce's necklace as he talks about this Fey warrior's bloodline running through humans. So this could be a massive hint towards it being Bryce.
Wow. I can't keep all of this stuff straight. Wow.
When I tell you I had 16 books opened up on my laptop last night, this is why. Now, we do know for a fact that this is not the same thing as the Eye of Elena. There's very similar descriptions, but it is different because the Eye of Elena is described as 2 circles within a bigger circle, whereas these are 3 intertwined separate circles, almost like a 3-circle version of the Olympic sign.
And
that makes sense?
Yes, and it's the the Eye of Elena symbol, the one of two circles within a larger circle, that is the same as Manon and their witch symbols. So they are very slightly different. Okay, yep.
So maybe like these three circles, like this Arcasian amulet symbol is like an evolved version of the Eye of Elena, possibly, if Tog is in a past timeline, but we're not touching that right now because we have way too much. Let's talk about Thanatos, because oh my god, I have been waiting to talk about this since we started ACOTAR. As Kier is leaving the council chamber, he says, quote, Lord Thanatos is having difficulties with his daughter again. He requires my assistance. And then he leaves. I'm screaming because I was on TikTok one day and I saw a video by Shannon Taylor. Yes, we will link it in the show notes, because Thanatos probably sounds mighty familiar, since he is the Prince of the Ravine, aka one of the princes of hell in Crescent City. He also, in Greek mythology, is known as the personification of death and is the son of Nyx, the goddess of night. But who is his daughter, you ask? Her name is Enris. Okay, things are looking fine so far. But until you look up, what does Enris mean? Are you ready for this, Lexi?
I'm ready.
Enris means fury. Fury! We know from House of Sky and Breath that Danica used her bloodhound tracing powers on Fury to learn what Fury's lineage was, and it was big hush hush. They like had a secret on each other, yada yada yada. Is Fury the daughter of the Prince of the 4th level of hell? And Sarah J. Maas just happened to drop it in a different series? For reference, ACOWAR came out in May 2017, and CC1 came out in March 2020. But she started writing CC1 in 2018. So it would have been very close. I am convinced that Fury is the Prince of the Ravine's daughter.
Now, to be clear, though, when they're talking about this lord in the Court of Nightmares, it is not, or it is that same Prince of Hell.
It is Lord Thanatos, which is the same name as the Prince of the Ravine it's Thanatos in Crescent City. It is the exact same name.
But are you saying that it's the exact same person, or it's a hint to it?
If they have the same name, I would have to say same person. Now, how does Kier have access to the 4th level of hell? I don't know, but maybe.
It's crazy.
Now, this also would mean if Thanatos is indeed Fury's father, that means that Thanatos had is kind of a stretch, but created, I'll say, both Fury and Hunt, which
That's
means
right,
they're kind of
Hunt's
siblings
father.
in some way.
Oh, man.
This is brilliant if this is actually accurate. Like, I'm stunned. All right, I have one more Maasverse Madness thing, because in the scene with the bone carver, he mentions multiple times wind and its connections to Nesta. He says, quote, how the wind moans her name, and quote, I can smell the wind on you, talking to Cassian. Could this be a witch clue for the Archeron family? I know we spent a whole long time going through how they're Fae descendants and the descendant of the Fae warrior and yada yada. So we're just going to, again, put that off to the side for a moment and wonder if this is actually a clue for the Mama Archeron being connected to witches. Because in Throne of Glass, witches are often called to the wind. There's so many mentions of Tog, witches, and wind. So could this be a hint, especially since Nesta several times jokes about being a witch with the Illyrians, and that scares the shit out of him. The more and more we do these kinds of theories, the more I think SJM actually might have put like multiple Easter eggs in, and then she could just decide later which bloodline she wants to go down. But I mean, it could be both. Maybe the Fae line is actually through Papa Archeron, and again, that's how he has access to Adriata and Valaris, and then maybe the witch bloodline is actually through Mama Archeron. I don't know, but it made my head go scratch. I want to start with Draken's people, the Seraphim, because they are basically angels, which what we know from the Malachim angels in Crescent City, they were created by the Asteri. Were the Seraphim then created by the Daglin? Now, that doesn't make them bad, because not all the angels in Crescent City are bad. But in Crescent City, some of the angels' powers, including Micah's, they include wind, which wind and air are the Seraphim's powers.
We do know that the Illyrians were bred by the Daglin, so I bet that they were.
I think you're right. So if Coach J is Daglin, I'm not saying he is, but just in case he is, does that mean that he's actually attempting to make a new breed of angels or like fire angels, just like the Asteri created archangels in Crescent City?
Interesting.
Is that a fun theory or is that an interesting theory?
I mean, that's me getting a little technical with her being a fire bird versus with wings, but I like where your head is at. I also just don't think that he is a Daglin.
That's true. I definitely think the Seraphim were created by
100%,
Daglin.
especially because the
absolutely.
Illyrians were. Yes.
So good. Okay, I've been foaming at the mouth to talk about this since we started this episode. Let's talk about seers in the Maasverse because they exist. And 9 times out of 10, it is a witch, which got me thinking. Because in the scene where Asriel says seer, Elaine turned to Moore, who was now gaping at my sister from her spot beside her on the couch. Elaine says, "Is that what this is?" Why is she asking Moore specifically?
I know where you're going with this.
Then, quote, Moore at last blinked, mouth parting, like that magic of hers had at last solved some puzzle. Slowly, clearly, she nodded. Why would Elaine be asking Moore for confirmation if she's a seer, especially if seer magic is known to being tied to witches in the Maasverse? Now, several options here. This could be a huge neon sign that the Archerons are actually descendants from witches instead, which actually got me thinking during your surreal tea time. If the Archerons are descendants from witches, and let's say the Ouroboros mirror is a witch mirror, no wonder Feyre could.
Yes.
No wonder Feyre could master it. Now, I did get texting with our good friend Lauren from Book Huddle, and she found this. And oh my God, so good. There are theories around the Archeron sisters being descendants from witches, with about the 45,000 million times that Nesta is mentioned being a witch in Silver Flames and Akabor. So there's a lot of theories around it. So Lauren went down a rabbit hole with me. Do you know what the word Kraken means?
Tell me.
It means cauldron.
No.
Are the Archerons descendants from the Kraken witch line, or does the cauldron turn them into Kraken witches? Because other than the Ouroboros mirror, like I just mentioned, there is not really any tie with Feyre being a witch. Now, we do know that the Krakens look much more high fae than they do like Manon, who with the iron teeth and all that kind of stuff. So I'm spiraling. I'm completely spiraling. There's about 2 different options that I really and truly see. Number 1 is that they're descendants from witches. And the second is that they were created as witches. Actually, there is a third. And that is that Moore this is back on my Moore is a descendant from the Kraken witch line. And no fucking wonder Elaine is like, "Hi, other witch in the room. Is that what this is? Is I like confirming with you?" Now, on another note, in Throne of Glass, like book 1, Throne of Glass, Selena mentions how, quote, seers had once used Bloodbane as a drug to view spirits from other worlds. Bloodbane, aka Faebane, aka something that exists in this ACOTAR world. I'm sorry, what? What could this mean? I'm freaking out. But I'm not done, because let's talk about the Ouroboros mirror. Because when Feyre is looking into research around it, some of the research suggests that whatever evil taints the Weaver of the Wood also taints the mirror too. The research says, quote, though they hadn't known her name, only that a Dark Queen had once had it. Dark Queen we mentioned this episode. Black Castle we mentioned last episode. Black blood, the Weaver of the Wood have black blood. Is she Vogue? Maybe even a Vogue queen, which...
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Now, if that's the case, that means that the Archerons, if they are a descendant from witches, they would have some Vogue blood in them, which also might be another reason why they are, because witches are... Because all witches are part Vogue. That would mean that they'd have some Vogue blood in them. So going back to the fact that this might be a witch mirror, though, one of the ways it could have ended up in Moore's family line is if she is a descendant from the Kraken witches. That might be how it ended up in their possession. Maybe it wasn't theirs when they came to this world, because the Ouroboros mirror was here long before they were, but maybe they were the ones who took it because they were the witch clan of the world.
Maybe.
Okay, I need to calm my heart rate down because I'm freaking out. Well, okay, question. Do you think that at some point Elaine might take Faebane / Bloodbane and view spirits from another world? Because I think so.
Yes, I could definitely see that. Absolutely. Although it's supposed to nullify powers, and we know that it worked on Nesta, so it has nothing to do with the cauldron.
That's true.
So that would be a really crazy thing for that to be a very unique thing only for Elaine. It's not out of the question by any means, but just saying.
I think if someone hadn't read the entire Maasverse and remembered that one line from when Selena is fighting Cain in Throne of Glass, it would be a hard pill to swallow.
I will also throw out that Throne of Glass was written so long before the series that it's hard to connect those early books, I think.
Agreed.
I'm not saying it's not impossible, but that kind of deep Easter egg might be more of just like a similar thing that is in two different worlds, and that's that. Continuing our conversation about how Koshte turns the other women trapped at his lake into swans, the only other mention in the Maasverse about swans, at least I will be honest, I do not have the ebook version of Crescent City 1 or 2, so assuming that it is not in either of those books, the only reference is in reference to Mab, the youngest of the three legendary Fae queens. Her animal form was a swan, and she was heavily associated with the element of water. Healing was her ability. That's where Aelin gets her own healing powers from. I have no idea how she could be connected to these women Koshte have, but that is the one swan parallel I found in the Maasverse, and of course it is connected to Koshte, who I definitely think we are going to see some other connections to with the other realms there. So anyway, so just keep this in mind for the next ACOTAR book, assuming we learn more about Koshte and he's the big bad.
I did a quick ebook search. There are 2 mentions of swans in A House of Sky and Breath. There were none in Earth and Blood. The first one was Madame Kira, who is the dance instructor. She is a swan shifter. And one time in Therion's POV, the River Queen's daughter had emerged from the mists in a pale oak boat pulled by a bevy of snow white swans. I don't think it's related, but it's just fun.
No, that's good for me to know. And that also is just another reminder that I really do need to get the ebook versions of Crescent City 1 or 2. I know. I just listened to the audiobook. I know. I need to do that. My bad.
Crazy. I have a short and sweet Maasverse Madness for the day. Let's talk about Mor's blades in battle. Quote, Mor wore Illyrian leathers as well, but the blades on her were different, slimmer, lighter, some of their tips slightly curved, like lightning given flesh. Seraphim blades, she told me, gifted to her by Prince Draken himself during the war. Lightning is very interesting given that Hunt, who is an angel in CC, has the power of lightning, and the Seraphim are the angels of the ACOTAR world. I don't think this means anything. It's just like a fun little nod to Hunt, I think.
All right, well, Nicole, step aside because I have more Maasverse to discuss. Let's get into Feyre's crown. The crown is described as crafted of silver and diamond, all fashioned into swirls of stars and various phases of the moon. It has an arching apex holding aloft a crescent moon of solid diamond, and it's flanked by 2 exploding stars. Pew! But more importantly, she let this crown call to her among the others. She feels drawn to it in a similar way as the ring in the Weaver's cottage that had Rhys's magical imprint on it. And while the crown doesn't look heavy, it does feel heavy. She says it feels like very strange, so it looks lighter than it actually is. When I first read this emphasis on the pull Feyre feels from this crown, remember that is why she chose it, because she really felt drawn to it. I immediately thought of the theory we've been talking about with her being of Starborn lineage. The shortest version of this is that perhaps the Archerons are also descendants of ancient Fae, specifically Thea, who was Starborn. What if this crown was Thea's and then her daughter Selene inherited it, and she is the one, remember, who married the High Lord of the Night Court? The timelines of this family heirloom treasure trove, we'll call it, being 10,000 years old, kind of lines up with Selene, who was born less than 15,000 years ago. And then when Bryce, Nesta, and Azriel are going through the tunnels toward the prison in House of Flame and Shadow, there is a particular line that stood out. quote, "To the right, around the natural archway, an array of stars and planets had been carved, crowned at its apex by a large setting or rising sun. Bryce's star glowed brighter as she faced it, guiding her here." These carvings all through the tunnels were made by Selene. And while this description matches, of course, the Dust Court, and in fact, I think there might even be a crown that might be on the cover of Silver Flames that also matches this Dust Court, it is an eerily similar description to this Night Court crown. And Bryce's starlight pulls her in this direction. Again, like, I don't think that's like a one-to-one matchup at all, but I thought it was so interesting with very similar descriptions there. And then here's the biggie. We get another mention of a crown of stars during Selene's mega download in House of Flame and Shadow, with an Asteri wearing the crown. And who specifically serves this Asteri? Thea. So what if Thea took this crown of stars from the Asteri she served after they overthrew the Asteri, and somehow it originally belonged to the Asteri, and then Thea was able to put her starlight power into it to make it her own, or the Asteri took it from the Starborn in the first place? At first I was, well, maybe this was a Dread Trove crown that the Asteri was wearing, and therefore it couldn't be this Night Court crown. No, the Dread Trove crown is made of golden spikes. It has nothing with stars in it. So that to me was like a, oh my God moment. About how it actually has a connection to Thea and the Starborn. And then, because it was very specific that Thea served this particular Asteri for centuries. And then we get two more mentions of a crown of stars that are associated with Bryce, at least in House of Flame and Shadow, where Hunt swears he can see a shadow of a crown of stars around her head. It's not actually there, but I wonder if it's reminiscent of the real star crown for the Starborn, and the real crown is there in the Night Court super secret treasure room that is 10,000 years old. And because Feyre is also Starborn, that is why she is drawn to it. But guess what? I'm not even done talking about crowns. Oh, putting aside the Starborn connection to this crown, kind of, there are theories about how this all connects, but we're not going to get too crazy here. This is more of just really cool parallels. Let's shift to the Throne of Glass connection, because there are multiple crowns of stars with similar descriptions as Feyre's. I don't think it's the same crown by any means. Like, I do think it is the same crown with Thea and the Asteri. The timelines get way too complicated. We still have to talk about these though. And a lot of what I'm pulling here is spurred from the fantastic Reddit post called 2 Books, 1 Crown by ClaimSalt 1697. Yes, we have the link in the show notes. Manon has the crown of stars, which was originally Rhiannon Crocken's, the last queen of the Crocken witches. I know you think here, Nicole, but I will say this crown of stars has a different description than Feyre's. Quote, "A living, glowing thing that glittered in her hand, as if 9 stars had been plucked from the heavens and set to shine along the simple silver band." There's no mention of moons like the Night Court crown, and Manon describes his crown as being light, whereas Feyre's crown feels heavier than it looks. So I do, however, love that parallel there with the witches and their own crown of stars, which brings me to Mab's crown that is Aelin's now by right, because she's her descendant. It's described as a crown that is ancient and glowing, crafted of silver and pearl and fashioned into upswept wings that meet in its peaked center. It's encircled with spikes of pure diamond and shimmers like the moon's rays. It's not the exact same as our Night Court crown, but oh my God, that is really, really similar. Like, really similar. Yes. It is also far heavier than it looks, as if it has a core of solid iron. So I think that Feyre's crown could have a core of iron based on this exact same description of weight. And then when Aelin wears it, she shines bright as a star. Sounds like some Starborn language there to me, although I admit it could also just be really cool, similar magic descriptions. Like, I will say that, but come on. Nicole is just freaking out right now. Oh my God. And then just a quick other thing here that I really didn't get too into, because to be honest, it was 11:30 at night last night and I need to go to bed. Elena also had a crown of stars. And then the most random connection to ACOTAR of all of this, glowworms.
I did not think
the
this
treasure
was where we were going.
The treasure room Reese shows Feyre has glowworms illuminating the crowns, and Aelin is in a cave with glowworms. It's described as a sea of stars. They are literally the same creatures with the glowworms like this. They are the same shiny blue, like they're the same kind of thing. So there you go. There's a big connection. Glowworms in both worlds.
Okay, wait,
I'm done.
Hold on.
Yes.
If Rhiannon Crocken's crown is similar to Feyre's crown, is that further parallelism that they are from a Crocken descendant witch line?
Or is this more parallelism for Thea and them being of the Starborn descent? I'm leaning towards Thea.
I am too. Like, I am convinced that it is the same crown. And that is right there showing that Farah is Starborn.
And I think it's
like Bryce.
It's heavy. Oh my God. And then they're like distantly related. That is wild.
And then I was also thinking about it because we had been saying, well, maybe Thea wasn't that ancient Fae warrior because
I think she is.
I agree, because I was thinking about it, and Celine, during her big download, made sure that her mother's memory was essentially erased. And what does the bone carver say?
What the bone carver says?
Yes, exactly what the bone carver says. So there, the ancient Fae warrior who is now forgotten because her daughter made sure she was forgotten, and she only now has part of her bloodline in humans, which I do think are both in Ember, therefore in Bryce, and in the Archerons. And boom, there is a great parallel right there.
Fucking delicious.
Okay, I'm done.
I love this shit. All right, folks, that is it for the day. Let us start with why. Oh, why did Nesta ask more about witches? Thus continues my Moore is absolutely a Kraken witch crack theory, because Moore seems to know quite a lot about witch magic. Also, how she's describing it with it being a power beyond their natural reserve, and how it's, are like spells and archaic tools that are used to harness the power and like made more than the cauldron allotted. Like, this is what I would imagine the third of the Night Court. Those are the kind of powers I would imagine that person to have. Also, because Moore, when entering the scene, is all like, ha ha ha, jokey. And then Nesta asks her, what's the difference between a fae and a witch? And quote, Moore answered with sudden seriousness. Why are you so suddenly serious, Moore? Is it because someone is asking you about your history? However, I will say that there are some very convincing arguments about Nesta being an Iron Teeth witch, or at least having some Iron Teeth blood in her. But all of those will have to wait until Silver Flames. I apologize for being such a tease. Or hell, maybe Nesta has some Iron Teeth and Moore is a Kraken witch. I am like so convinced. It is actually insane. Because whenever a witch is brought up on the page, at least thus far, it's always been around Moore, and Moore has always had some kind of reaction. Like, I don't think that's an accident. And it is time for one of my favorite crack theories. Lexi, are you ready?
I am ready.
That crack theory is that the Suriel is actually Kaltain Rompier from Throne of Glass. I have been seeing this all over the effing interwebs, and I'm going to pull most of this info from actually a video from That Girl Reads on TikTok, video in the show notes, all that good stuff. But let's start off with the cloak connection, which is the big thing that set off this theory here. When Kaltain is about to sacrifice herself in Morath, she gives Elide a scrap of the cloak that Selena gave to her back when they were prisoners in the Glass Castle. That cloak meant so much to Kaltain because of that moment with Selena, and honestly, it was really the first time anyone showed Kaltain any act of kindness. What does the Suriel cherish above all? Frickin' cloaks and sometimes chicken. But there's more. Selena/Aelin is also known for frequently saying, quote, a better world. And the Suriel's dying words are, leave the world a better place than you found it. So this could be Kaltain being touched by Selena's kindness and wanting to pass it on to the next person. That Girl Reads also connects that Kaltain is the castle gossip and loved the tea. And what is the Suriel known for? The tea. I love that. Like, she's like, this is such a silly connection. And honestly, I'm so here for it. I love it. Now, there is also a theory that whenever a huge act of magic occurs, a portal rips in the multiverse, basically. So when Kaltain destroyed Morath with Shadowfire, she basically ripped open a portal into Prythian and over time became the Suriel. This is my favorite, though. This is what sealed the deal of this crack theory for me. When Kaltain dies, quote, as she brought it all crashing and crumbling around them, Kaltain smiled and at last burned herself to ash on a phantom wind. When the Suriel dies, Feyre thinks, and I quote, I could have sworn that pile of ashes was stirred by a phantom wind. Oh, also when Feyre asks for the Suriel's name, it does not give it to her, saying that it's not important now. This is just so much sus SJM shit right here. Last but not least, as the Suriel is dying, from Feyre, quote, real pain, as mortal as any creature. Mortal? Kaltain? Now, I do need to throw a huge wrench into this theory that when the Suriel dies, black blood is what sprays. So Could this be a result as Kaltain, had the collar on her? She was Shadowfire. She became part Volg over time, basically. However, as Kaltain is dying in Queen of Shadows, she does slice herself open a little bit, and her blood is red. So that's a little bit of a hole in this theory. I don't know. The Phantom Wind really sealed the deal for me. I mean, the first one is like, it's not even a spoiler. It's just, hey, this is a thing that's in both worlds. The white foxes that are in the Winter Court, quote, bearing what looked like to be messages strapped to their little embroidered vests. I mean, this is the otters of Prythian, which I can't decide which is cuter, the otters or the foxes. I would swoon over both. I love them. They're adorable.
I might go with the foxes, but that's only because I really love the Winter Court.
You need to read Quicksilver, woman. Oh my God. Number 2 is that Rhys telling Feyre, quote, you do not yield. Woof. Oh my God. I was transported just right back into Kingdom of Ash pain. Now, it is important to realize ACOTAR released in May 2017, which means she was working on it all the time prior. And then Kingdom of Ash was released of September of the following year in 2018. So I wonder if actually You Do Not Yield was born as part of this exchange between Feyre and Rhys, and then she used it with Aelin in Kingdom of Ash. Number 3, I would be remiss if in the Ouroboros mirror episode I didn't mention it possibly being a witch mirror. For the full download of that, go to ACOTAR episode 4 in the Maasverse Madness section. But especially if this mirror was Striga's, who has black blood and is described as a queen, I wonder if this is maybe even like a Vogue Queen's mirror, which is like a more extreme version of a witch mirror. I have no idea. But then there's also the tie-in between Striga being the three-faced goddess who the witches worship in Tog. So that would also kind of add that extra element of it's like a witch mirror on steroids, basically. And then last but not least, number 4, the 3 stones that are used for scrying. I immediately wondered if it's a stand-in for the 3 series, and more importantly, the 3 FMCs for the 3 series. It could be another call for the Archesian amulet with the 3 interlocking circles. I mentioned that earlier with the bone carver drawing that on the cell floor. I don't know. Just the 3, I was like, oh, 3 females, 3 FMCs.
The three-faced goddess.
The 3 oh, duh.
Yeah.
That would absolutely work too. So I don't know. I just thought that was a fun little tie-in, and I wonder if that was just a little nod to each of the 3. Now, it is important to note that by the time that ACOTAR came out, Crescent City was not out yet, but I do think she was working or at least cooking it up in her head.
We have to talk about Truth Teller and its prominence in House of Flame and Shadow.
I'm going to get on my high horse for 2 seconds, and then you're going to actually like be, intelligent, and like give actual information. I just need to be mad for 4 seconds. In chapter 69 of ACOTAR, Asriel said, it never failed me once. Quote, he gently took her hand and pressed the hilt of the legendary blade into it. It will serve you well. True. And you know who else it served well? Bryce fucking Quinlan, who stole his emotional support dagger from him. I will never, ever get over the fact that she took his emotional support dagger and then yeeted out of Prythian. Does it make sense for her and her story? And she has no loyalty. I'm sure. It does. Whatever does, I'm still irrationally mad. Like, I'm still so mad. Especially the fact that he's never given it to anyone. And Elaine was the first person. And then someone stole it from him. Anyway, and
then she gave it back.
She did. Still,
anyway, Truth Teller's twin is the Star Sword, which is a sword Bryce carries and is originally from this ACOTAR world, known as Gwydion, King Fion's sword. These 2 weapons are drawn to each other, and when close, they sing to one another. Truth Teller also glows a dark light in response to the sword's white light. In Midgard, there is a Fae prophecy which says, quote, when knife and sword are reunited, so shall our people be, aka Truth Teller and the Star Sword. I understand 2 meanings to this prophecy. One, and I'll say the main one here, is that the Fae people of Prythian have been separated for 15,000 years, and so have these 2 weapons. The Fae's original homeland is where ACOTAR takes place, and that's where Truth Teller has been all this time. And then Thea went with some of their people to Midgard, taking the Star Sword with her. Well, actually, Truth Teller originally went to Midgard too, but then it went back with Selene. Anyway, so when the knife and sword are literally reunited, so are the Fae people of Prythian and Midgard. The second meaning is when these weapons are united, they can open a portal to nowhere. How? Because the sword is made and the knife is able to unmake things. I don't know exactly what that entails, but anyway. In other words, made and unmade, matter and antimatter. Thanks to the sword and knife being reunited, Bryce is able to destroy the Asteri and send them to this place of no existence. By defeating the Asteri, the Fae of Midgard are free from their tyrants and able to unite in a way they never have been able to before. When Bryce transported through realms to the Fae homeland, her star sword guided her to its twin so that they could be reunited. And that is how and why she ended up in Valaris near Asriel with his Truth Teller. But how did Asriel end up with Truth Teller in the first place? We don't know yet, but the dagger originally belonged to King Theon's dear friend Anelius. When Anelius died during the war against the Daglin, King Theon took Truth Teller and began carrying it until he died and Thea took it. Once in Midgard, Thea sent her daughter Selene back to their homeworld with the harp and the dagger. Since Selene married the High Lord of the Night Court and had children with him, we can assume Truth Teller was passed down through the generations of the High Lord of the Night Court, which makes me inclined to think Rhys gave Truth Teller to Asriel, or his father gave it to him, as a symbol of giving the dagger back to the ruler's right-hand man and dear friend. Asriel is indeed familiar with Anelius's name, because when the Asteri Vesperus says to him, quote, "Did Theon send you then to slay me in my sleep, or was it that traitor Anelius? I see that you bear his dagger as his emissary or his assassin." Following that statement, quote, "The words must have meant something to Asriel. The warrior let out a small noise of shock." Which, yes, Asriel is absolutely familiar with the name Anelius. Now, did he know that this dagger had previously been Anelius's? We don't know. That might have actually been that moment of truth for him. But Anelius was the very first Illyrian warrior. The pass of Anelius that Nesta guards in Silver Flames, that was the pass of Anelius. He was the very first Illyrian warrior, and the right is in honor of him. We will talk about that so much more in Silver Flames, but there is that huge parallel there. One more thing about Truth Teller. During Celine's mega download in House of Flame and Shadow, she says about these two weapons, quote, "As she had helped made them, they answered to the call in her blood, to her very power." This is Selene talking about her mother, Thea. Building on my previous theory that the Archeron sisters are distantly related to Thea, this means that Elaine's ancestor wielded Truth Teller and answered to the call in her blood. One more reason why Elaine could be fated to wield Truth Teller in such an impactful way. I don't know why I'm so convinced that the Archeron sisters are descendants of Thea. Like, it's all making too much sense.
It makes too much sense. That's why. Like, it makes so. Oh my god, that's so good.
One other Maasverse Madness thing that I have to pull in is that the Seraphim, aka Draken's Legion and Draken's people, are the ACOTAR equivalent of the angels, and aka the Malakim from Crescent City. I also want to point out that in ACOTAR they have wind power, which I believe both Isaiah and Micah have in. Obviously, Micah's is like on another freaking level because he's an archangel, but definitely Isaiah has in Crescent City. So they're absolutely the same breed, yes. I'll call it. Sure.
And I know that we said that this is Crescent City spoilers only, but I just kind of want to wrap up our conversation about Striga and Daglin and stuff like that. So spoilers for Throne of Glass here. What I think is that Striga, and I suppose the Bone Carver too, they are Volg. I know that there's like that theory that the Volg are the Asteri, and of course they're the Daglin too, but I'm under the impression that there are different levels of Volg, right? Like we already know that. And I think that the Volg might be almost like an earlier version of the Asteri and the Daglin. And so I think that Striga might be like, I say Volg Queen, but it's not quite to the same level of the all-powerful Asteri and Daglin. So it's kind of like the Volg Queen is like a few steps below the Daglin. This is all just me in my own head here, but that's what I think though. So I think she might not be Daglin and Asteri like that level, but she is just a level down as a Volg Queen.
I'm down for both options. Am I still going to point out every single instance that the Daglin are the Asteri and the Volg? Absolutely, yes.
Yes, and I do think that the Volg are absolutely connected and like,
oh yeah,
like I said, like a lesser version of the Asteri, almost like a less evolved version of the Asteri.
Yes.
No Volg Queen would be able to get killed with her neck getting snapped.
That's true. That is
So that's why it's like I just don't think that she can be that powerful ultimately, because unless it's just way too convenient of a plot point.
That's what I'm leaning towards. Unfortunately, I think I am leaning towards it just being way too convenient of a plot. Anyway, we could debate this until we're blue in the face. Let's talk about Amryn. She mentions how she first thought her arrival in Prythian was some sort of punishment for disobeying her father's orders. She thinks, quote, "I thought this world was some hell he'd locked me into." Hell, you say? It's almost like Bryce Quinlan, in search of going to hell, ended up in Prythian instead. There are so many theories around hell being Prythian, or Prythian being connected to hell, or some level of hell, or the library is the hell. There's so many different theories, but I will poke a hole in this. We do know from Adis in House of Earth and Blood that hell is its own planet. And I don't think it is the same planet as Prythian, mainly because Adis says in that same sentence that, quote, "The Fae, the Shifters, and many others came from their own worlds," inferring that they are different from the worlds of Midgard and Hell. However, Adis does mention how the Malachim were made by the Asteri. Malachim is Hebrew for angel or messenger. What does Amryn call herself earlier in this book? A messenger. We know from SJM that she is basically an angel of death-like character. However, I mentioned earlier that Amryn's saying father is a stand-in for God per that SJM interview, but I also wonder if it could be a stand-in for the Asteri. Was Amryn's kind one of the, I'll call it, first versions of the Malachim? I'm assuming they were too powerful, especially given that the parasite water over time, made power diminish. So I'm looking more at like Isaiah or like people like that at that level. Paulus, stuff like that, they would have their powers diminish over time. This would be, however, a Asteri committing a nicety, because the father was very okay with Amryn yeeting off that planet. The other thing I want to note here is that the cauldron, as it's, breaking the world as we know it, Feyre thinks, quote, "It was a hole, airless. No life could exist here. No light." This sounds a whole lot like where the Asteri went at the end of House of Flame and Shadow. Is this the same black hole? Yes, absolutely. This is, I don't think that this is just a coincidence. A small thing that I honestly think is actually just a coincidence. Right after mentioning the void, Feyre thinks, quote, "An unending lightning strike that surged from me into this place." It's just that fun little lightning, and then I'm immediately thinking of Hun. I'm sure it's a coincidence, but I was like, oh, that's fun.
Well, and then what we were just talking about with the black hole and the Bob getting thrown into it, if that is the same black hole, it is literally off somewhere in the black holeness of the universe. And we know that the Book of Breathings ends up in Jessica's library.
Yes.
And nobody knows how.
That's probably how.
Well, at least we know step one, and then we don't know how the heck it gets from the black hole to the library. But at least there's that.
Yeah, that part's lost on me. But we got at least step one.
I do want to continue our conversation from the Surreal, because I was really tiptoeing around some spoilers there. The Daglin, aka the Asteri, made the cauldron this world's kill switch to protect their interests as the overrulers of the world. They make kill switches in every world that they go into and they take over. Like in Midgard, it's the First Light core room, which, yes, when Bryce blasts Godslayer rifle into the First Light core and activates the kill switch, quote, "A darkness like none you have ever known shall devour this planet, and you will all cease to exist."
Black hole!
I love when that happens. Yes.
In Feyre's opening chapter, she notes how there's a wicked-looking mace on Rhys's desk. I immediately was like, what's this wicked-looking mace? This isn't a throwaway line, because it's mentioned twice. And I looked in the Maasverse, and there's 2 other mentions of a mace, and only in the Throne of Glass world. There's one in Celaena's training montages, basically in the first book. And there's also a mention of the Trove of Aniel when Aelin, Rowan, and co are basically looting Chaol's dad's weapons for battle and all that kind of stuff. They find ancient-looking maces. Could be the same. Could be absolutely nothing, but I thought it was something to at least point out. But here's why I really need to be here at Maasverse Madness, because my God, this book gives more and more equals witch material. In case you missed it, I am convinced that Mor is a witch, more specifically a Kraken witch. Number 1, the Morgan is a triple goddess of death in Irish folklore. Who do the witches in Tog worship? The 3-faced goddess. Number 2, her family had the Ouroboros mirror, which I am 1,000% convinced is a witch mirror. Number 3, witches are brought up in the Illyrian camp, and immediately Nesta's like, what's the deal with witches? Who answers?
More. Elaine also asks Moore, what's a seer? And Moore is shocked, but she answers, where else do we see seers in the Maasverse? Number 4, when asked why she's third in command because she's the one who Rhys calls in when Cassian and Azriel are dead, absolutely think that this is because she can perform the yielding. Number 5,
Wouldn't she die?
Yes, she would. But so are Cassian, Azriel, and Rhys, and I'm assuming probably Amber. So which is so terrible, but I'm assuming. Number 5, she primarily wears red, which is the color of the Kraken Witch clan. And honestly, those are all just the recaps that I could think of off the top of my head. I didn't even go back into outlines. That is how prominent this is. But now we're in Frost and Starlight, so we get more parallels. In this first one, I am going to give a small trigger warning because I do discuss stillborn birth, so please listen to your comfort level. In Moore's flashback of her being dumped at the Autumn Court border, she has 3 nails in her abdomen. Again, just another tie into that number 3, aka the 3-faced goddess. But you also can't help but think of Asterin. While Asterin's branding was because she gave birth to a stillborn witchling and from a human father, it's not entirely unlike the reason Moore was also nailed, because she is now considered quote unquote spoiled goods. But also some rapid fire from this moment. She mentions how the nails in her are iron nails. Immediately you think of the Iron Teeth witches with the iron nails. And Moore also wishes that she could grow claws and rip out their pale throats. Again, the Iron Teeth witches. Everything is right there. This stretch does give me a big Moore question because Rhys mentions, quote, I knew better than to ask if she thought her mother would come along. We didn't discuss Moore's mother. Ever. Why? Is it because she's a witch? And what does it mean?
I thought it was just because she's a bitch. But
maybe she's a witch bitch.
And friends, we are purposefully not going to be including Ramiel or the Blood Rite or any of that kind of stuff here in today's Maasverse Madness because trust us, we will be getting into all of that in Silver Flames.
We need to continue this Moore conversation because her POV chapter gives us some big Maasverse questions. Question number 1. What is this patch of darkness? Well, Reddit has some answers. Competitive_bus4057 wonders if this is a word gate. And I'll put the link to the Reddit article in the show notes because honestly, it's awesome. We learned from Baba Yellowlegs in Crown of Midnight that, quote, there are gates, black areas in the word that allow for life to pass between worlds. Could this be what the shadowy darkness is? And Moore just almost accidentally missed out on an opportunity to travel to Aurelia, Midgard, or somewhere else entirely. But then, as competitive_bus4057 brings up, this also could mean that Bryaxis is watching her, and maybe Bryaxis itself is a word gate. But the theory continues, and this is where I just get chills. I love it. Because some of the commenters noted in this Reddit article, this patch of darkness is also super similar to that shadowy darkness that watches Hunt in the Asteri dungeons in House of Flame and Shadow. And we know that to have been Adis, one of the princes of hell. So the princes of hell can travel through this shadowy patch of darkness. Could this be, rather than Adis, could this be Thanatos watching Moore? Thanatos has been mentioned in the ACOTAR series before. This would absolutely check out as a way for the Princess of Hell to enter our ACOTAR world. This crossing of worlds is especially sus when you look at the line at the end of the chapter, where Moore mentions mists being around. Mists, aka ley lines intersecting, creating thin places within the world easily able to travel to. Oh my God! This was amazing. I loved it. Question number 2. Is Elia an Asterian horse? Moore mentions how super rare and coveted the breed is, and honestly, that's all I have to go on, so it's fun to think about. And question number 3, and I realize this actually does have a little, the most minor spoiler from Empire of Storms, so keep that in mind as you go into it. This is a small passage from Empire of Storms in the Throne of Glass series. All of the wind talk from Moore. Moore is riding as fast as the west wind and her blood calling her to go on the wind. Who else is quite connected to winds? The Witches of Throne of Glass, who specifically is connected to western winds? Manon in Empire of Storms. She thinks, quote, the song of the western wind singing her home. Moore is a witch. Mic drop. I got it. So, with this being the opening episode of Silver Flames, I have to bring up the cover. There is a mask, and above the mask, there is a partially covered sun. I'm going to call it a setting sun, aka dusk. Is this an Easter egg for us readers for Nesta's future? Possibly as High Lady of the Dusk Court, especially with all these goddamn queen mentions. And I guess it could be or, is this a tie to her being Starborn Fae, which we will talk about in a second.
She even goes to the prison in this book, which is where the Dusk Court used to be.
Do you think she's going to be High Lady?
I don't know about High Lady. I have so many thoughts that are still kind of jumbled around. So I cannot wait to start getting them all clear and to start conveying them and processing and talking all about the Dusk Court, the prison, the starbornness. Like, it all ties together and I can't wait.
I have a feeling we're just going to be brushing the surface. And as I was writing this out, I had to keep reminding myself, this is episode 1. I can't go all into this, but we are just going to be brushing the surface with this theory today. But that theory is that Nesta, and therefore the rest of the Archeron sisters, are descendants from the Starborn Fae line. Yes, Bryce, Rune, Rhysand, Thea, Helena, Celine, all of them. As we discussed in our ACOMAF coverage during chapter 55, that Feyre starts glowing with starlight. There are so many mentions of starlight. And when asked if it's the day court, it was never really confirmed that that's where the power came from.
And we've kept bringing it up since then, like with Feyre's crown that could have originally been Thea's from an ACOWAR episode.
But this star language is just getting started in this book with Nesta emerging from the cauldron as, quote, a newborn star. And she also looks at the night sky from the House of Wind. Quote, she lets starlight gently brush her head, her face, her neck, imagined it running its shimmering fingers down her neck, as her mother had done for her and her alone. This cannot be an accident with how this is written. Literally talking about starlight and then bringing up her mother. So this is the question. Is their mother the descendant of the Celine line of the Starborn Fae, aka the Fae warrior that the Bone Carver discussed back in ACOWAR, whose bloodline still runs through some human line, aka the Archerons? We know from Celine that when she came back to Prythian, she mated with the High Lord of Night and they had babies. Was there a lost child, either through them or even just somewhere down the line, and they went to go live with the humans, maybe even, I won't say mate, but maybe mate, but go be with the humans, and then they stayed in the human realm? Yes, Lexi?
What if, because they lived in Valaris, and one of them decided to go be a merchant and then took off, and they are actually from Papa Archeron's line?
Okay. Okay. I honestly am so torn.
I contributed to Spice Watch.
I can't decide if this would be from Mama Archeron or Papa Archeron, because there's so many question marks when it comes from Mama Archeron. For instance, Tamlin saying, like, your mother never told you stories about us.
Yes.
Like, all of those little hints. But Papa Archeron is so intertwined with all things Prythian through Spice Watch and Gem Watch and all those things watch. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's both of them. That's a little weird, but maybe. I don't know. I can't decide. But at this point, it is so canon to me that the Archerons are descendants of the Starborn Fae. Like, that is so that's not even a question of mine anymore.
I agree. And all this discussion about a newborn star and Nesta's connection with stars, that's not even taking into the fact that Bryce has the same star on her and all of the implications that that has. Again, we will be getting into that throughout this deep dive. Bryce's parting words to Nesta are, quote, I think that 8-pointed star was tattooed on you for a reason. Take that sword and go figure out why.
8-pointed star. How many words is, and she emerged from the cauldron at, like, an emerged star, whatever the fuck I said earlier, that is 8 words. Like,
honestly, at this point, we just need a whole episode about this entire Starborn theory and how it connects to everything and how it connects to all these different characters, because the evidence is all there that the Archeron sisters are descendants of the Starborn Fae.
Absolutely. Pivoting ever so slightly, this is a shorter one, but Nesta saying, quote, she didn't know where she belonged in this world either. I couldn't help but think of my favorite moment from Flame and Shadow when Ember says to Nesta, quote, you'll find your way. Nesta, by the end of this book, has a found family, but as we learned in House of Flame and Shadow, there's still something missing. Maybe that could do with the Dusk Court. There's this something missing, and she feels like she finally needs to go back to her ultimate homeland, I'll call it. Now, we talked about, is she going to be the queen of the Dusk Court or the High Lady of the Dusk Court? I could see that. One of the things that I see more is her I'll call it resurrecting. She's the queen of death, resurrecting the Dust Court.
Yes, especially being like the master of the Dread Trove. And remember too, the cauldron is the creator of all life as well. And its magic is directly tied into all of the land. And even though Nesta did give her power back, which we will explore all of that at a later time too.
But she didn't though, because she has it in Flame and Shadow.
Yes, that's the confusing thing. This book is going to give us a headache.
I feel like I need to
Let's move on to something a little bit easier to understand.
Rhys has a model that he built centuries ago that, quote, somehow allowed Rhys to ponder the existence of life outside their own world and other things. Sure. Who else has one of these other than the priestesses? The Autumn King. His purpose was wanting to learn their original homeland of the Fae and the truth behind it.
Which is where Rhys and them are.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
I do wonder if this little, I'll call it Easter egg, is here for us to prep for Crescent City Sky and Breath.
Yes.
Because Sky and Breath came out a year after Silver Flames was released in 2021. So it's almost like it's foreshadowing, but for another series.
Yes, it makes me think that SJM was letting us know that, hey, these worlds absolutely live within the same universe. And like you're saying, it was definitely prepping us for the crazy ending of Sky and Breath.
Still one of my favorite endings ever. But this also makes me wonder if Rhys knows that there's other life. Do you think we're going to get more crossovers of Maasverse characters? Like because of Rhys's, I won't even say because of Rhys's research, but because of the foreshadowing of Rhys's research. I think if anything, it would be from the 26th string of the harp.
I don't know if, you know what I actually think, and I don't even want to say it, is that it could potentially tie into him becoming High King. I'm not sure exactly how that would work, but you know how knowledge is power, and he has knowledge about other worlds. I really do think that he and Meryl are going to connect and figure some things out. Or maybe, after Bryce left, he goes to the library to start learning about, how a girl with pink sneakers dropped out of the sky. And that's where he and Meryl start pairing up and they start doing way more work. And then that expands into more possibilities there. So that's actually not tied to the High King whatsoever. But yeah.
I definitely think that this is priming us readers to get ready for more Maasverse connections. Yes.
Yes. And I do think that Rhys will be a key player in those connections there.
I agree.
I'll say that.
I am going to be very curious how SJM handles the next ACOTAR book, because if it's post Bryce landing in Prythian, they can't just not talk about that.
I do think that from here on, it's going to be you have to have read this book in order to read this book, and it is going to get a little bit complicated.
I genuinely do hope so. I hope that it is, you have to have read at least Flame and Shadow, because yes, there's a lot of information, and yes, it's going to start getting complicated. If SJM tries to dance around the fact that a girl with pink sneakers was here in the realm, that's going to get more complicated, especially if this is post Bryce having been in Prythian, which I can't.
And then the entire download that Azriel and Nesta did receive.
Well,
too.
and the fact that Celine looks like Rhys's sister, like.
So many loose ends. Yes.
I need the date for ACOTAR 6, please, God. Alrighty. Back to the Rhys's last name conversation. There are, of course, some Maasverse theories around this. God, I love this community. Most popular being Dannon, especially with the likeness to Rune. But we do know that Rune takes after his mother in likeness, and the Autumn King's last name is Dannon. So unfortunately, I do think we can rule out Dannon here. So that brings me to another one. What if his last name is Haviljord, and Rune's mother's last name was Haviljord? And there's just a bunch of these Haviljord lines in these different worlds. However, here's the wrench. Gavin Haviljord was the first Haviljord that we know of in Dorian's line, and he is human. So it could be Celine's blood is still running through the Haviljord's line, and that's the human line that the Bone Carver was referring to, which Celine does look like Rhys's sister. So that's not out of the question. However, there's also the idea, and I love this idea, it's that Rhys's last name could be something absolutely ridiculous. We've had Fenris Moonbeam, and Lorcan became Lorcan Luckin. So I'm leaning more towards this option. And like, what if Rhysand's name is like Nighthawk or something like that? Like, I am Nighthawk.
You must call me Nighthawk. I am Dragon. Shout out if you've seen that meme. It went super viral, and I was very proud of myself.
It was so good. I love that meme.
So here is a question, though. Do we ever know what Fionn and Thea's last name is?
We do not.
Because we know that Selene marries the High Lord of the Night Court, so it probably wouldn't go through her line with the last name. But anyway,
That's a last name we're not being told for a reason, for sure.
I'm probably going to be in the minority here, and this is not fun whatsoever. But I think that we as a fandom are looking into the last names a little more than SJM, and she just didn't come up with last names.
Yeah, I think we're all so starved for anything ACOTAR that we're like, it's Resend Nighthawk. Anyway, moving on to my second and final Maasverse Madness. It's a short one today. Nesta falling down the stairs. When she does fall down the stairs, Nesta, quote, blinked at her hand. She'd seen sparks. With all the witch and witchcraft language around Nesta, people wonder if there is some witchness in her lineage. And there's some theories wondering if she tapped into almost having iron teeth claws in this moment. Personally, I actually wonder if this is more her Starborn power, if she is of the Starborn line, which I'm convinced she is. We never see Bryce use any Starborn power that sparks come about, but maybe the parasite in the water could be dimming it. So in my opinion, this is Nesta accidentally tapping into Starborn magic.
So I do think that this is specifically referring to her silver flames, which we know Nesta will wield very specifically in House of Flame and Shadow.
We have to continue the conversation around the bargain tattoo because, oh my God, there is so much more layered to this now that we've read House of Flame and Shadow.
Did you all know that Bryce has the exact same 8-pointed star on her chest? It's a scar there. Oh my God.
I know. Oh my. So we know from Bryce that her scar came out, quote, when I ... revealed who I was, what I am to the world. I drew the star out of my chest. This got me thinking, because when Nesta decides to train, to tap into that purpose, that is hers and hers alone to choose. That is when the mark appears on her skin. We know that the 8-pointed star is also on the floor of the prison that used to be the Dusk Court. We do know from Bryce to Nesta, quote, I think that 8-pointed star was tattooed on you for a reason. Take that sword and go figure out why. Nesta has to resurrect the Dusk Court, right? Like, are we in agreement on this? And it would also be so poetic with her power being death if she were to resurrect something.
I love that so much. Yes. Well, and then also, if we remember in House of Flame and Shadow, Bryce's star is directing her to that location in the prison there. Now, Nesta no longer has her 8-pointed star, but she does point to Bryce and say, I used to have that exact same tattoo on me. And now with Bryce, it's a scar, while with Nesta, of course, it's a tattoo.
And earlier, what you were saying with that symbol used to be connected with the OG people of the Dusk Court. There's no way Nesta's not a descendant from Thea. Like, there's no way.
That's my biggest thing too, is that I really do think that they are descendants.
Yeah, same.
I mean, going back to what Bryce said, you know, I think that 8-pointed star was tattooed on you for a reason. Take that sword and go figure out why. I think that they are going to find out that they are descendants of Thea.
Same.
Yes.
I do too. Do you think they're going to go into the prison and it will be the 3 Archeron sisters? So maybe we're going to get the next ACOTAR book is actually going to be split POV between Elaine, Azriel, Nesta, and like maybe Lucian too. I hope Lucian, but like it's going to be a split between Elaine's story and also this continuation of Nesta's story at the prison and learning about Dusk and all that kind of stuff. Or do you feel like that feels like 2 different books to me, but I don't know.
It really feels like 2 different books. I will say that I don't know if nervous is the right word for it, but I am curious to see how this is going to go with ACOTAR 6, because there are so many different loose ends, both with what we've been waiting for from ACOTAR as well as some of the setup that we got in House of Flame and Shadow. So I can't help but think it has to be Azriel and Elaine, whether it's them being together or their own separate stories. But Nesta has such a big question mark next to her too. And I don't see us going on Nesta's journey from a different character's POV. No. But if we have Nesta and Elaine, it might feel a little too crowded.
I will say House of Flame and Shadow was like 7 people's POV. And I do think we're going to be steering away from 2 people POV and into more like 4 or 5. And it's not my favorite, I'll be honest, but we have been with these characters for so long that it might feel a little bit different. I do wonder though, because Nesta's not the only one with this tattoo. It is Cassian as well.
So, but I don't think it's from his past. I think it was tattooed on him with this bargain because it was a bargain with Nesta, because she's extra
Yes.
powerful with the cauldron, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But I do wonder, with that mark being placed on him, does that mean he's going to be tied to the Dusk Court and all the courts and all that kind of stuff?
I think it goes back to because Nesta is his mate.
Yeah.
That is why he's tied into
I
it.
agree.
Yes. So his destiny, his fate is tied directly to hers.
This is a really small thing, but I loved this so much. Gwen enjoyed the dusk services more than anything because she thinks the music is beautiful at that time. And that got me thinking, the Valkyries, I'm going to talk about the core 3 Valkyries with Emery, Gwen, and Nesta. If Nesta does go and resurrect the Dusk Court, do you think Gwen's going to go with her and Emery?
I think I could definitely see that. Yeah.
I think it'll entirely
definitely.
depend on if they go with their partners, because we're assuming that Mor and Emery are going to be together. And then maybe if Gwen and Asriel are together, which who knows, but that's a possibility.
I don't see Asriel leaving the Night Court.
I don't either.
Even though he doesn't like the Illyrians.
He does hate the Illyrians. But I don't know. No, actually, you know what? I said I don't either, but I don't know. Because there is like that, there's a few lines where he's like, I don't feel like I've ever belonged. Or where Rhys mentions how he never feels like he's ever belonged. So actually, I'm going to take that back. I could see Asriel yeeting.
So I will say, when I was talking earlier about how Nesta might resurrect it and how they would then be at the Dusk Court, there's still the issue of the prison.
Yeah.
And the reason that area is so barren is because Selene was bringing all of those monsters to the prison, and it turned into the prison. And because of all of their terrible power, it like leached the life out of that area. So I don't know how in the world they will resurrect life back here.
Yeah.
With those monsters still at the prison. They would literally have to move the monsters to somewhere else.
I have no idea. I have no idea how that's going to work.
You know what? I think that Romiel might be our new under Romiel.
That's the new Isle Kingdoms. Is that what you're
That's the
saying?
new Isle Kingdoms. Yeah, under Romiel.
Amazing. All right, last one. We have to go back to Blue Annis, which is one of the monsters that Cassian trapped in the prison. Blue Annis has cobalt skin and iron claws. She is a female who has a taste for human flesh. Does this sound mighty familiar to anyone else? Hello, Iron Teeth witches, especially because there's the whole Blue Blood clan with, I mean, yes, it's cobalt skin, but still there's the Blue Bloods, and that is not that far off. But here's what got me thinking. Lanthus we know is the father of the Bogey. What if Blue Annis was the mother of the Iron Teeth witches?
Possibly. Okay, so first and foremost, let's keep the serial tea time on the Dread Trove going. Also, real quick, you all, it is getting so hard with Silver Flames and discussing some of these concepts and having to keep the spoilers out of it.
Because it's like some things that we absolutely know from Crescent City are only speculatory in ACOTAR. So it's like, we have to be like, well, and there's this possible fourth object. Let's Luna's horn. Like, it's so hard.
And I'm also not trying to make these like Crescent City surreal tea times either. So I'm trying to make sure that it is relevant to ACOTAR. So anyway, here goes. We have to spill the beans on the fourth Dread Trove object, Luna's horn. This could honestly be its own episode, so I'm going to do my best to summarize it as it relates to the Dread Trove. The horn, made out of ancient bone, is able to open the rifts between worlds, and it serves as a bridge between realms. How useful for a multiverse! This is seriously one of my favorite parts about how the Maasverse connects. When this all unraveled with the fourth Dread Trove object and all of that, my jaw was on the floor and I was so excited. More than 15,000 years ago, when the horn was on its home planet where ACOTAR is, and the Asteri/Daglin were defeated, Queen Thea used the horn and the harp to open a portal into Midgard and lead her people, plus some from the Autumn Court, to this seemingly welcome planet. Her daughters, Helena and Selene, used the horn and the harp to open up a portal back into Prythian, but only Selene, the harp, and Truth Teller made it back. Both Helena and the horn stayed behind in Midgard. After this, and the battle with Thea where she was killed, Peleus, the first Starborn Prince, and High King Theon's High General, took the horn, as well as the Star Sword, and started crafting his own story. That's a whole other topic, though, that I'm not going to get into right now. Ultimately, the horn broke. The Fae and the Asteri tried to renew it through magic and spells, but no luck. It was then given a place of honor in the Asteri archives before it was transferred to Lunathian, Luna's temple, after the city's establishment. Danica stole the horn, ground it up into powder, and had it tattooed to Bryce Quinlan's back with witch ink. This made Bryce unknowingly the bearer of the horn, and because she is Starborn Fae, she is the only one who can wield the horn.
Wait, pause. hold on, because if she's Starborn Fae, then if also the Archeron sisters are Starborn Fae, specifically Nesta, that would also be another reason why she can wield all three objects and live to tell the tale, in addition to being such a powerful maid person. Or is that stretching?
It's confusing.
Keep going.
This gave me quite the headache. Let's just leave it at that. All right, let's talk more about the Dread Trove history. Fionn and Thea spearheaded the defeat of the Daglan using their own weapons against them. Now, of course, this does include Truth Teller and the Star Sword, but it also includes the Dread Trove items. Thea found them where they were hidden under Ramiel, and then she took them, and then they partly used those to defeat the Daglan. Then, after defeating High King Fionn, Thea took the trove for herself, and then she became High Queen of Prythian, and she had unchecked limitless power. But she wanted more than what the Fae homeland could offer. So I'm assuming she hid the mask and the crown before departing with the harp and the horn. That is why it was last known to be on Prythian, because she hid them in Prythian. Fast forward to Selene returning with the harp. Of course, she is the one who hid the harp in the prison. Once on Midgard, we find out that the Asteri have been looking for the Dread Trove. They are on a mission to find the Dread Trove. In fact, even in present day, before the Asteri are killed or sucked into the black hole, whatever you want to call that, before Bryce defeats the Asteri, they have been looking for this homeland because they want that Dread Trove back. So when Selene returned back to the homeland with the harp, of course, she is the one who hid the harp in the prison. I'm not going to get into all of that quite yet. We will be going to the prison in a later episode, so I'll put a pin in that with all the harp and prison stuff there.
I was listening to the prison part of the book just like this morning or like even last night, and I swear to God, I felt like I was going on a trip. Like once you know all the Maasverse connections, and then there's the people like banging in the walls and all this, it's just, it's so good. But we're not there yet. However, like Lexi mentioned during the surreal part of the ACOTAR part of the episode regarding the mask, it is mentioned how no one can take on and off the mask and live to tell the tale except for Nesta. However, we know two other people who also can take the mask on and off. Bryce, who has the maid object tattooed on her back, is able to wear the mask and take it off without any repercussions. But so is Hunt, who is able to slip the mask on and off, and he slips the mask on to escape death in the final battle. But yes, putting on the mask is very painful. It basically rips his soul apart, but he is able to take it off, or it actually kind of falls off, and live to tell the tale. Because Bryce and Hunt have magical maid sex the night before, and therefore Hunt is maid.
So the way that I see it is because we know that the harp can transport magic from one person to another. For instance, that is how Thea transported her raw starborn magic into both of her daughters. I think that maybe that's not necessarily only a harp thing, but it is something that the horn gives Bryce that ability to do as well. And I also have a new theory that I had called you about yesterday, and we'll get into this more later because I'm still processing through all of it. But maybe Nesta is, I'll call it the chosen starborn, because when she was made, the cauldron transferred that magic really up front and center for her versus it being diluted through thousands of years of ancestry.
Yes. Oh, God. We need to stop or else I'm going to just break out in hives.
Maasverse is getting really hard because like these could be their own episodes and we can't let them be their own episodes. Maybe someday, but not right now. Let's continue with our part 2 of Surreal Tea Time regarding the Bog of Urid, because some major historical events happened here. But first, we know from Selene's download that after Thea and Fionn defeated the Daglan and ruled as High King and Queen, Fionn wanted to pass the crown after his passing to their eldest daughter Helena instead of his wife Thea, because he didn't believe she was a worthy successor, and he thought it was time to let the next generation rule after he was gone. Well, Thea and her general, soon-to-be lover Peleus, did not like High King Fionn's decision and made plans to overthrow him, which brings us back to the Bog of Urid. It used to be the Daglan's private game park, where they crafted terrible monsters to serve as worthy prey. That's what I think the Kelpie was created for. While Fionn, Thea, and Peleus were hunting in the bog, a Kelpie dragged a bound and gagged Fionn into the water's inky depths. Quote, the once proud proud king screaming as he went under. And Thea and Peleus just let it happen, watching impassively. I'm also guessing they were the ones who bound and gagged him in the first place. Then Thea summoned Gwydion / the Star Sword, which was Fion's cauldron-made sword, and Truth Teller, its twin, which had been his dear friend Analius's, who died in the war, from the waters where they had been dragged down on Fion's person. And when she held the sword and dagger, starlight flared from Thea, as well as the blades glowed with their own starlight, reacting to the starborn power. This empowered Thea to become the ruling High Queen, now in possession of the 4 objects of the trove and both sword and dagger. So why is all of this important and applicable to the bog in the present day? Number 1, the bog is described as, quote, dead trees, gray with age and weather, jutted like the broken lances of 1,000 soldiers, some draped with curtains of moss. No leaves clung to their branches. Before Fion was dragged underwater by the Kelpie, maybe this Kelpie that Nesta slays, this land was lush with grass and trees in bloom. But the moment he died, literally the moment he died, petals began falling from the trees, and it was as if the land died with its king. So here we are more than 15,000 years later, seeing this dead land still mourning the loss of its king. Number 2, in the Bog of Urid, Nesta sees soldiers in ancient armor and, quote, judging by their fine armor, they were warriors and kings and princes and lords.
So we have to wonder if these were Fion's men. Like this, I read that and I was like,
I read that too, and we know, according to legend, this land used to be sacred, so could they have been laid to rest here along with their weapons as a final honor well before the king was killed? Or maybe a battle against the Daglin took place here. There's thousands of soldiers, so I don't think it was only from this one hunting excursion.
yes, I love the idea that this is one of the battles against the Daglin, and that's where this took place, especially given the number. In Celine's download, it's also only mentioned that Fion, Thea, and Peleus are here. But based on this description, it feels way too on the nose not to be a Fion nod. There's also the first soldier who stands up and like helps Nesta against the Kelpie. In my head canon, that is Fion.
It could be personal revenge against the Kelpie because he was also killed by the Kelpie.
Oh my god, that's so good!
Also, we do know that after the Daglin were defeated, that the land really came alive again without them literally feeding off of its magic and all of the people's magic too. So maybe that's what really brought this land back up. And after High King Fion was defeated and killed, he was somehow tethered to this magic of the land or something along those lines. I don't know exactly, but just some fun speculation there.
Because Fion and Thea ruled for, and I think it's described as a millennia after they defeated the Daglin. So that is entirely possible. Yes.
And then she ruled for another millennia after he was defeated. Yes. While the inner circle doesn't know how the mask ended up here, my guess is that Thea was inspired by the location of Fion's downfall, and she came back here to hide the mask before she went to Midgard, especially now that it seems cursed and the land is dying. She's like, nobody else is going to come here. This is a great place to hide the mask.
We've also heard of another Kelpie. In House of Earth and Blood, it's a little less than 1 year before the start of our story. Bryce tried to convince Jessica on the Habba's behalf to get some iris eels to brighten up the space. Instead, she got a Kelpie, quote, that had humped the glass with all the finesse of a wasted college guy. God damn it, I love Crescent City. Later in the book, Jessica brings in a knock, which in Celine's download, when they're in the Bog of Urid part and she's showing all of that, they see a Kelpie, and Bryce notes how it looks like a relative of the knock.
Speaking of the Kelpie, it speaks a 15,000-year-old language, as we were talking about, one that Rhys and Amra know, which is how they will communicate with Bryce before she takes the magic bean. Rhys only understands every other word here, but he communicates pretty well with Bryce, so he must have brushed up on his Babble app in between diaper changes.
Taking a bit of a pivot, this is also not the first time in the Maasverse that we've seen silver fire. I have been waiting to talk about this. In Empire of Storms, when Deanna possesses Aelin at Skull's Bay, quote, cold white light, tendrils flickered, silver flame. And that's when it dawns on Rowan that this is not the wildfire she's about to unleash, but moonfire. So cold it burned, quote, the cold of the stars, the cold of stolen light. I love the stars, like kind of a tie into the Night Court. Stolen light. Stolen, I always just associate with Nesta. I don't think that this means necessarily that Nesta is a descendant of Deanna, but a comment on a Reddit post, Snarf, Snarf, Snark, mentions, I say that 5 times fast.
That sounds like a South Park reference. Like
it might be.
No, like it is actually.
Mentions how it could be
be because the cauldron's power is that of the god's power. So Deanna's power was utilized in the cauldron, or one with the cauldron, part of the cauldron, and that's one of the parts that Nesta took. I also couldn't help but notice that Deanna is also known as Lady of the Hunt. Could this be tied with the Wild Hunt? I have no idea. Some people also wonder if Deanna is Nesta in a different timeline. To be quite honest, I don't know how that would work unless Tog is way in the future, which wouldn't really line up with what we know about shifters and Hofast and all of that.
Oh, yeah. I don't, because then Aelin falls through the ACOTAR world and Rhys slows her down, which is this winter solstice in our story that we'll be coming to here shortly. So I think that the whole time jump things, like, we already got realm worlds. I think it's all on the same timeline.
I agree. And I think personally, I love this idea that Nesta and Deanna are tied somehow, but I do think that it is just similar powers and a fun nod to the similarities in these different universes.
I want to pull out this quick little nod of foreshadowing between Azriel and Nesta in House of Flame and Shadow. In chapter 32 of Silver Flames, Nesta thinks how the two of them could be allies. And it would be so cool to see their friendship and camaraderie on the page months later in House of Flame and Shadow.
I love Nesta and Azriel in House of Flame and Shadow. Like, Brett and I just got to Caves Part 1, and oh my God, I love them so much.
Me too. It's also, again, so hard to not act like House of Flame and Shadow is quite a full-blown sequel after Silver Flames, because otherwise we'd have a whole other episode here in Maasverse Madness. So I just wanted to pull out that one little one.
Earlier how I was like, yeah, I don't think Nesta's powers are gone. We know they're not gone because
we know that they're not gone. Yes.
The dungeons of the Hewn City. While in the interrogation room with the two surviving soldiers, we learn that whatever remains of the bodies that Azriel is working on, it goes through the hatches in the center of the room, which leads to a pit of beasts below. We will become so familiar with this in House of Flame and Shadow when Bryce is stuck in that same room, or at least a room like it, and opens the grate to winnow down to the beasts who do not attack her. And this does lead to her, again, part 1 of Cave's conquest. Also, in that interrogation room, guilt and shame cloud Rhys's eyes because of how Feyre feels with the way that they're treating these soldiers who are not in their right minds. I think that this is the moment, and maybe possibly others like it stacked on top of this, that was the real turning point for Rhys using his powers with prisoners more sparingly, and why he didn't look into Bryce's mind and instead asks for permission at the beginning of House of Flame and Shadow. And of course, Bryce shot him down. I am still team, if someone dropped from the sky and was claiming that these evil things called Asteri had it out for my planet, I would definitely do some mind sleuthing, but that's just me.
I will say, I also do think that she came from a place of good intentions. Like, she wasn't, I'll call it, a bad guy, at least as far as they knew. Like, the jury was still out. And so he didn't want to initially jump to those conclusions of treating her like a prisoner. It's more of treating her like we don't know what to do with you yet. Let's figure this out here.
So they put her in a dungeon with a grate with beasts below it that growled at her when she threw peas
But you know what I mean? Like, she's like just wanting help. She's asking for help. She's not trying to kill anybody. She's an anomaly that they don't know what to do with her versus her being a bad guy.
But she hasn't stolen Azriel's emotional support dagger yet, and that
no, of course not. Yeah. All right, I'm so excited to keep talking about Pegasuses here. The legend about them originating from the island of the prison is correct. When the territory was the lush islands of the Dusk Court and ruled by Queen Thea, her winged horses soared among the clouds. The magic of the land, as we know the territories have, nourished the Pegasuses to thrive in their natural habitat, and the sky literally did devour most of these winged horses because Thea brought them when they opened the realm portal and went to Midgard.
We also know from Celine's download that Thea rode them into the battle on Midgard.
Yes, and in the Prince of Caves, there are carvings of the Pegasuses being slaughtered. I believe most of these creatures died during that big final battle, and the few that survived ended up in Avalon, which makes sense that they ended up with Helena and Peleus, because he became the first Starborn Prince of Midgard, and I think he also ruled over Avalon, because that's where he was buried with the Star Sword. However, after the Asteri were defeated, 24 Pegasuses appeared in Avalon after Bryce frees the land. It's like they sprang out of the earth, like they were hibernating or hiding there for all those thousands of years. Bryce will wonder if Helena somehow kept them secretly alive, waiting until it was safe to appear again. The land of Avalon yielded its lush green lands, holding the power as it was bid until someone with the Star Sword and Truth Teller came to unlock it at the 8-pointed star mark. When Selene returned to the Fae homeland and corrupted the land that was once her mother's dust court, imprisoning evil monsters that caused the islands to shrivel and the earth become barren, I wonder if that's when they went to the day court. And it makes me also wonder if there's like a day court connection to the magic of the dust court that the Pegasus are drawn to, even if their numbers are dwindling because the natural source that once helped them thrive is gone. All of this to say, what if Nesta does something similar to the prison territory with freeing the land? I know it's barren for different reasons than Avalon, with Selene putting the monsters in the prison, but I could see Nesta freeing the land in a similar fashion. And maybe the Pegasuses will return to their homeland, and Nesta will fly off into the sunset on her winged horse with her Batboy by her side.
Woo! Let's do another thing that we learned from this big old Selene download, and that is about Gwydion. We get the long lost sword Gwydion mentioned in this stretch.
It is so hard not to do a full serial tea time here on Gwydion / the Star Sword. It would be its own mini episode. I pretty much just did one for the Pegasuses, but you know what? I'm going to go dive into this anyway. After Thea and Peleus ensured Theon died by Kelpie in the Bog of Urid that we learned all about last episode, scaled hands from within the water thrust Gwydion and Truth Teller out of the pool. Thea summoned both blades to her, and when she snatched them, starlight flared from Thea. Gwydion and Truth Teller answered to Thea because she helped make them. They answered to the call in her blood, to her very power, to her starborn power. With Gwydion, Truth Teller, and the Dread Trove, she ruled with unchecked power as High Queen. Amren believes Gwydion disappeared around the same time as the last of the Dread Trove objects, which, correct, it did, because Thea took it with her on the crossing to Midgard.
After Thea came over to Midgard with the sword, she left it with Helena when she transferred some of her power into both of her daughters.
And Helena, with Gwydion and the horn, didn't make it back to Midgard with Selene, who was in possession of Truth Teller and the harp. Peleus, unfortunately, ended up taking Helene and forcing her to be his wife. He also took Gwydion for himself, and I assume he renamed it as the Star Sword. But according to Adis, the Star Sword was supposed to go only to Thea's female heirs. I think that's why Bryce is ultimately the owner of the Star Sword, and it makes sense for the setup that she ends up giving it to Nesta, who may also be a descendant too. As the first prince of the Starborn in Midgard, Peleus Buttface was buried with the Star Sword in the Cave of Princes. Since females were not allowed in the Cave of Princes, there was no opportunity for a female heir to attempt to reclaim it. And yes, it seems like that was a rule about the cave on purpose, so a female heir wouldn't have the chance. Luckily though, Rune ended up retrieving it. I figure fate knew he would willingly give it to his sister, the female heir of Thea. Okay, sorry, this is getting longer than I meant. So real quick, the Star Sword / Gwydion can defeat death, which definitely makes sense because it was made by the Cauldron and can kill the unkillable. The Autumn King avoids touching it, and I have to wonder if it's for a similar reason that Rhys and the Bat Boys don't touch Nesta's made weapons here. In Midgard, there is a Fae prophecy which says, quote, "When knife and sword are reunited, so shall our people be," referring to both the Star Sword and its twin Truth Teller. So when Bryce reunites them when she travels to the Fae homeland with the Star Sword, she's fulfilling the multi-meaning prophecy, which I know we've talked about in a different Maasverse Madness, so I'll stop here. I love how this is one of the objects that connects these worlds, and Silver Flames just has so many Easter eggs. Last thing to note, I promise. Bryce gives Nesta the Star Sword and tells her to go figure out why she has an 8-pointed star tattooed on her back. Again, tying Nesta to the Starborn and the Dust Court, and now she has 2 made great swords. Holy shit.
Brava SJM and brava Lexi for pulling that. Let's do some rapid fires now.
Helion thinks one of his ancestors tried to wear the mask before, but as far as we know, the mask was hidden by Thea before departing for Midgard, hence why it was lost to history. At least that lines up with the timeline we have, although we could be wrong. There's never any mention that she hid the mask and crown. That is simply an assumption. And before Thea, the mask was in the Asteri's possession. So is there something more to Helion having such a reaction to the mask's power? Maybe it's connected to why the Pegasuses went to the day court, like I was mentioning earlier. Like there's a tie between the dusk and day court. And the mask is warning the High Lord of Day not to mess with the mask, which was wielded by the High Queen of the Dusk Court, and it's warning like not to be corrupt like her. Yeah, I realize that's a stretch, but I'm still pointing it out.
One thing I want to add to the Valkyrie Kings mentioned. So the Valkyries in Norse mythology are connected to, in addition to Odin, the main god in Norse mythology, they're also connected to the land of Hel, spelled the exact same as Crescent City, Hel, H-E-L, as one of the 5 possible locations for the dead to go. I'm massively summarizing that. If you're a Norse mythology person, I know I'm leaving a lot out. Please don't at me. I know. So here's my crack theory. What if one of the princes of Hell is the old king? You mentioned earlier it has to be someone less than 500 years, but we do know that Thanatos exists somewhere on Prythian, so maybe that's my guess. What if it's Thanatos? When the Bat Boys unsheathed the weapons, the great sword, quote, truly glowed like moonlight lay within the metal. After last episode with bringing up Deanna's possession of Aelin and Skull's Bay, and we know that that was Moonfire, I wonder if this Moonfire is at another parallel to the Silverfire being Moonlight?
Oh, I see. I was going to say it's a nod to Nesta's Starborn power. Moonlight, starlight, feels similar. I'm also so riding hard on this Starborn train here too. On the note, speaking of which, of Starborn power and these weapons, I will say Rhys is of Starborn lineage. So theoretically, he should be able to wield these weapons if we're talking about it in the sense of Starborn power. So maybe it doesn't have anything to do with the Starborn power then.
So are you backtracking for yourself?
Just throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall. It's Maasverse. There's no rules in this section.
Last but not least, fucking when you're made. This is such a small thing, but Amren's quote, "I'd be careful when you're fucking her," to Cassian is kind of a valid warning. I know I ripped into Amren so hard this episode, so here's something that she did right. Because technically that's what happened when Bryce transferred some power into Hunt, allowing him then to wield the mask. He was temporarily made with a capital M. So with how much Cassian and Nesta fuck, I'm guessing there's a lot of made points stacked up within Cassian.
Okay, everybody. They're gone, right? Can you tell how blue in the face we were not being able to talk about all of the Crescent City tie-ins to this part of the book? Like at this point for today's Maasverse, just read Crescent City 3. There's your Maasverse Madness.
Celine download.
Yeah, just read the Celine download. Oh, speaking of which, let's kick off this ridiculously long Maasverse Madness with our Surreal Tea Time Part 2 on the Daglin. And I'm just trying not to do like an entire Crescent City Surreal Tea Time. I don't know what their equivalent would be. Maybe like Jessica's Library or something.
Oh, that's good. Library of Parthos, if you will.
Yes, the Library of Parthos. But no, we're not doing that. We're
not doing
within ACOTAR. All right, so who are the Daglin really? They are the Asteri.
No!
Who conquer worlds and feed off the magic and lives of the citizens. Basically, they're parasites. They're tens of thousands of years old at the minimum, taking immortal to a whole new level of truly immortal. They're also able to survive long periods of time without breathing, eating, or drinking, as we saw with Thea's punishment for Vesperus, trapped beneath the prison for more than 15,000 years. Though the description of Daglin in their true form remains unknown, it is widely speculated that their true forms are an extreme form of raw power forged from stars that inhabit whatever bodies they possess. Bryce describes the Asteri as being made of light. The Asteri claim that their great powers are from holy stars inside themselves, and they can physically manipulate things with its light. By the way, Asteri means star in Greek. The Asteri can kill and destroy with their power. I feel like with being all-powerful beings, that goes without saying. But we learn that their current power originates from both the first light and second light of Midgard's inhabitants. Thus, the Asteri feed off the population and use that power instead of their own. A quick history about the Asteri. The Asteri claim to have forgotten the location of their original home world, but we know from Vesperus that was once green and plentiful, except it grew to be too populous, wars broke out, and rivers ran dry.
I also want to point out that the bone carver says, quote, "Where we came from, ... I do not believe it is now anything more than dust drifting across a plain. There is no home to return to, none that I desire." That sounds a whole lot like what Vesperus said. I am still team death gods equal Asteri light. I'm going to say they all come from the same world. We also know that almost every death god we've encountered has black blood. Weaver, Lanthus, I guess the Suriel too was a death god. So what does this mean? When we're looking at Volg, because Volg is immediately what we associate with black blood, I look at the death gods like Lanthus, Bonecarver as almost like Volg princes / princesses, and the Asteri are the evolved Volg kings and queens, because Volg and Vesperus both had black blood.
Yes. So anyway, on their home planet, this world's brightest minds found ways to bend the fabrics of worlds and travel between them. They called themselves wayfinders or world walkers. So they left their destroying planet to find life elsewhere in the universe. However, once they left their home world, the Asteri's powers started to dim. They were dependent on their land's inherent magic, and magic on other worlds wasn't potent enough. But they realized this too late, and they couldn't find a way back home. So they had to figure out ways to amplify their powers with the magic of the land. For instance, in the Fae homeworld, that's where they pooled their power together and imbued the gifts of the land into the cauldron so it would work to their will. They warped it, turning it into something deadlier, no longer just a tool of creation, but of destruction. They have records of their conquests going back millennia. Due to their need to survive and thrive off others, the Asteri have spent eons traveling from world to world, conquering and farming off the life forces of other races they deemed sustainable, and destroying any that rebelled. They give many worlds kill switches to protect their interests. However, during their conquests, only 3 worlds have been documented as successfully driving the Asteri out, including the Fae homeworld and Hell. Okay, so let's go back to the Asteri's reign in the Fae homeworld. They ruled over the Fae for 5,000 years, and the Fae ruled over the humans in the lands the Daglin allowed them to govern. Any attempt at rebellion was quashed before forces could be rallied. The Daglin were just too powerful. The Fae were forced to make the tithe to the Daglin once a year to offer up kernels of the Fae's power in tribute to their true masters. This was to fuel their own power, remember they feed off others' powers, and to limit the Fae's power. I'm assuming even though the Fae were forced to participate, technically they had to offer up this kernel of power. The Asteri hid pockets of their power throughout the lands in case their enslaved Fae should cause problems. Some of these pockets of power are likely beneath sacred mountains at their very roots. The magic draws all sorts of creatures. Not the fuzzy nice kind, but like the Midgard worm kind. Or perhaps even the crazy beasts over by Ramiel as well. Wouldn't that be interesting? There are certain places that are better suited to hold power than others, like where the veil between worlds is thin and magic naturally abounds. Mist around an environment are proof of somewhere being a thin place, like the prison territory, and every world has at least one thin place. The Asteri thrived here with magic naturally abound and the cauldron in their possession. Now, earlier I was talking about how they might have made the Book of Breathings, and I do believe that they did, because the language that it is written in is the same language of what is on Bryce's back. And that is what Amryn says has not been spoken in 15,000 years, and it is what Rhys did not know about too. So that would have to be the Asteri's language, like what Ataraxia is from is of the Fae's old language. With the cauldron in their possession, the Asteri made the trove, though kept the 4 items hidden under Ramiel and squabbled over who would use them. So basically no one ended up using them. Which brings us to their downfall. Over the millennia, the Daglin became arrogant in their unending dominion of this world, but their overconfidence blinded them to the force like none other that was gathering in secret. Thea ended up stealing the Dread Trove to use it to their advantage. Yet Thea and Fionn and the other Fae rebels knew they needed to use the most valuable weapon of all, the cauldron, which was located at the base of Ramiel. Next thing we know, Fionn is pulling Gwydion out of the cauldron, and they used these weapons against the Daglin to defeat them, destroy them, or send them off to another realm. But the surviving Asteri want to take back the Fae homeworld, which they believe to be rightfully theirs. So remember how I mentioned Anelius fought against the Daglin soldiers at the base of Ramiel? I think he held the line because they needed to guard the cauldron. So somehow they got access to the cauldron at the base of Ramiel, and he was the one who was guarding it, and that is why the pass is named in his honor.
Oh, that's good.
I felt really proud of myself for making that connection.
That is really good.
Let's round this out with how the Daglin/Asteri rule differently on Midgard. And I'm going to use present tense here, even though we all know what happens at the end of Crescent City, because you've read it, right? Right? Because it seemed like the Asteri learned their lesson with Midgard. Blatant oppression, like on the Fae homeworld, led to revolution. In Midgard, they masked their oppression through the illusion of freedom and a twisted form of democracy. More than 15,000 years ago, after they were defeated by Fionn, the Asteri arrived on Midgard and began to lure other races from different worlds as a means to feed off of them. This included the Fae, Shifters, and other Vanir. For instance, the Shifter Fae from the Tog world. Oh my god, look how it's all coming together. The Asteri's propaganda is that they were liberators and enlighteners. According to them, the Asteri chose Midgard as the place to begin creating a perfect empire, and creatures and races from other worlds soon came to Midgard through the Northern Rift. But what none of these other species knew is that the Asteri put parasites in the water to weaken everyone else's magic. The Asteri created the hierarchies of the Vanir and made up a ritual called the Drop to harvest the power of the magical creatures of Midgard. These Vanir are required to hand over their first light upon reaching immortality. It's essentially a tax on their magic, but more importantly, food for the Asteri. And there you go. I apologize if I forgot something. That was
good
a lot.
to her, please.
There you go. The Daglin reign.
Wow. Honestly, props to SJM for creating this. Like, I know that there's Cauldron Boil Me's, but like that's an achievement. Wow.
I remember reading Crescent City 3, specifically the Selene download. And no, you know what? Even Crescent City 2, when Bryce went into the Dusk Room, and it was just like, there were so many things that were just unfolding, and it was so exciting to be connecting all of these dots. And it is just so cool with how we're able to bring it all together. And I can't tell you all how difficult it is to separate this ACOTAR only part from the rest of everything else, because we know so much more.
Well,
let's get into that. Yes. Okay, so quick behind the scenes. Not talking about what we actually know about the Harp's flashback and the people trying to get through was one of the hardest things that we had to do on an episode. I think that was the first time I've ever pretend theorized, which was basically me just asking a million questions.
I wouldn't even say pretend. You asked all the questions we had until we read Crescent City 3.
Yes.
We know from Selene's download that when she ran back to Prythian, she chose to survive instead of stay on Midgard and fight alongside her sister and her mother. To be fair, also Helena was on her way up into the Prythian portal, and then she chose to stay back and fight with her mother. But anyway, in choosing survival, Selene had to shut the door to Midgard behind her, locking out an untold amount of people and trapping them in Midgard, which question mark, we'll get to that in a second. In Nesta's vision / flashbacks in the prison here, she sees them as their way back is forever sealed. So are they like floating in the in-between, or were they actually still on Midgard and are now super dead thanks to Thea and her daughters?
That was definitely my understanding because of how desperate they were with the enemy coming. And the way that it's described with that opening of the worlds, it feels very much like a door. So that's my understanding. Yes.
That's what I figured. I didn't know if they were like floating around in the black hole, like where the Asteri are, like the place in between worlds, if you will. But that makes a lot more sense. Nesta thinks how someone, quote, very wicked used the harp last. She ain't wrong. And Selene's download obviously has some very interesting choices that Bryce is very vocal about. While I wouldn't call Selene truly evil, though, she made some very complex choices that were inherently very selfish.
It also feels rather full circle that Nesta is present during Selene's download and finds out exactly what happened from her flashback. So during Selene's download, Nesta and Bryce are pretty much on the same team, where it's like, you suck, you bitch.
Yeah.
And Nesta has her own reasons why as well from all of this that happens in Silver Flames.
Well, also, if she's also a descendant from Selene and the Thea line, then her and Bryce have even more in common, considering they're both descendants of that starborn power.
But we got to talk about this prison chamber because we learn in Hofast that the constellations on the floor in the prison chamber are actually the constellations of Midgard. And right after Selene closed the gate again on many, many, many people, she sat in this chamber with nothing but the 8-pointed star on it, and she set the harp on top of it right before she started carving the constellations of the world she abandoned. I also wonder if the reason that Nesta alone can step through the wards, other than being made, is if she is a descendant of Selene. We know that Selene keyed her son, the one that glows with starlight, his blood into the prison, making it so that only their bloodline can control the wards of the prison. If Nesta is a descendant, this is her bloodline. So no wonder she alone was able to walk through the wards. Rapid fire, because this Maasverse Madness is probably, I think, the longest we've ever done. I think so.
Honestly, we were even literally talking about it being its own episode.
Yes. At the lake, as Cassian is watching Nesta practice swordplay, he thinks, quote, like that 8-pointed star was stamped on her very heart. This line cannot be an accident, especially because just a few chapters later, it mentions how she was brought to the chamber with an 8-pointed star for a reason. Like, the more and more we deep dive this book, the more and more I'm like, yeah, Nesta's going to resurrect the Dust Court. Absolutely. I will say, however, I was listening to Crescent City 3 on a road trip recently with my husband, and when Bryce resurrects Avalon, she basically uses the magic of Thea to unlock the earth and bring life back into it. So there's a lot of assumption that, oh, well, Nesta's going to do that with the Dust Court. But what does Elaine love to do? Garden. What if she has her gardening love and ability to like bring things to life because she is also a descendant of that same power? So maybe she and the Archeron sisters together are going to be what is able to resurrect the Dust Court. I don't know. I got a little on my little crazy high horse. Another rapid fire.
The 3 pieces of the starlight. I mean, I think that's going to stretch too far, but
hold on. Wait, because you just said, because with Bryce, she had to use the 3 pieces of Thea in order to unlock a, no. The third
she
piece
also
was
needed to use Gwydion and Truth Teller as well. She uses Star Sword and Truth Teller.
Which are now back
to
on
unlock
Prythian.
it, which are both now on Prythian. Yes. And take this great sword and figure out what to do about that 8-pointed star. Yeah. I think Nesta's going to go back to this exact location here in the prison, and I think that there might be something, like a key.
Like a key. Yes, exactly. Like exactly how it was on Avalon in order to.
Now, what the hell that means for these monsters, I have no idea.
Oh.
But bring the Pegasus back. I'm telling you. Nesta is going to ride off into the sunset on a Pegasus with her beautiful bat boy flying next to her.
Maybe Blue Anus is just going to be buried in the sand, just like the Autumn King was when Avalon. I mean, I know he was dead already, but still. Maybe they'll just be trapped below. It's Anus. I know it is, but no, it's Anus. What is it? Oh my God, I have 2 more. Okay. During the Wild Hunt mention, Lanthus says how they had hounds, and Rhys later says that they don't look like any kind of hounds they're used to today. And Nesta notes how these hounds look a lot like the hounds of the Hewn City. From Akamath, the descriptions of the beasts of the Hewn City look like, quote, great scaled black beasts were carved into these gates, all coiled together, all in a nest of claws and fangs, sleeping and fighting, some locked in endless cycle of devouring each other. Now, some people wonder if this is a version of word hounds, although I wonder because the description matches more that of the Ilkin, just without the wings, much like Rhys's form. No matter what, I'm 100% positive that this is a crossover mix hint, but I don't think it's a one-to-one comparison. Kind of like how the Volg and the Asteri we think are like evolved versions of each other. In the bonus chapter with Nesta, Asriel, and Bryce, where the latter plays the music on her phone and Nesta loves it, Asriel loves it, it's great, and Nesta is baffled when she learns all of the different kinds of music and how many songs such a small device can hold. I just love that small tidbit of information and how much each of the SJM women has a passion for the arts. It's just so great. And last but not least, we can't not mention the 4th object in Lanthus's vision, made out of ancient bone. Of course, it is Luna's horn that is now tattooed on Bryce's back.
And it seems like it's veiled in shadow I believe because it's worlds away that they're not
Yes.
able to truly see it. Yes, exactly.
Exactly. All right. I have only two very small ones, actually, this episode, which was a relief after last week, which was meaty. During Cassian and Nesta's mating, I was on the hunt for any star language. Because if you remember in chapter 55 in our coverage, I found so much star-born language, glowing like a star, flaring like a star, from when Feyre and Rhys's mating bond is solidified. So if you want to listen to that episode, it is episode 9 of our ACOMAF coverage. But the only thing that I could find in this scene was when Nesta talks about the threads glowing between them, quote, life glowed like starfire, and she had never seen anything more beautiful. There's a lot of glowing language, but it's all around the threads and their bonding together. So I do think that that is definitely more what it's leaning towards, but the starfire feels very on the nose. And all of this star language is leaning me further and further down my hill that I'm already willing to die on, that the Archerons are descendants from the Starborn Fae, aka Thea's line in Prythian. And then, last but not least, when I was reading the bonus chapter of Crescent City 3 with Nesta, Azriel, and Bryce all listening to music on Bryce's phone, all I could think about was when Nesta goes back to Cassian and she's telling him all about this, magical device where there's thousands of songs on it, and he's just like, fuck you, Bryce.
I know, right?
Show up my symphonia. That's all I can think of.
Me too. All right, friends, that is it for today. Next week, we are covering chapters 60 through 64 of Silver Flames. We're really getting into the home stretch here. And of course, like we mentioned, we will have an episode releasing this Thursday all about Azriel's bonus chapter that has the fandom going, oh my God. And yes, we will be talking a whole lot more about the famous ship battles. Is he going to end up with Elaine or Gwyn?
Okay, you're probably gone if you have not read these. We need to talk about some things that we couldn't mention during the whole Sacred Mountain underneath Ramiel segment. Because I mentioned, what if Annelius is buried underneath? We know that Celine, underneath the prison, carved the full story of the fall of the Dust Court, and then she had her holographic download moment. Are we going to get another one of those with Annelius under Ramiel? And then would there be another one under the Sacred Mountain in the middle? Since it's in the middle, would it be from Fionn? Probably not, because he died in the Bog of Urid, so I could see that one just being left alone because we already spent so much time under that mountain. But also Cassian mentioned he hardly would call the prison a palace. But it used to be. I couldn't say that. And that was hard. That was hard not to say.
We also can't forget about what Vesperus said about hiding pockets of the Asteri's power throughout the lands, specifically under the Sacred Mountains. There is absolutely a reason they're all barren, and I wonder if it has to do with the Asteri magic, where it's corrupted the mountains from what has taken root beneath them, or the Asteri's magic has somehow continued feeding off these locations, causing them to be the only 3 barren mountains. These places of hidden magic are better suited to hold power than other locations, where the veil between worlds is thin and magic naturally abounds. The Asteri's magic thrives in regenerative magic of the land. While Vesperus goes on to discuss thin places in particular, I am so hung up on this about the Sacred Mountains, and Ramiel seems to be the only one that hasn't been explored whatsoever. We'll save more theories about what's under Ramiel until next week's episode, where we are going to be talking a lot more about Ramiel, but I just love it all.
We also finally have made it to, I'd argue, our biggest Throne of Glass ACOTAR crossover.
Oh, absolutely. I'd say the only direct one.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
This is the Starfall, where Aelin flies across the sky. In case you forgot this part of Kingdom of Ash, allow me to refresh your memory. Towards the very end of the book, where Aelin leaps through the gate and flies through the worlds, she falls through Lunathian, quote, a world where a great city had been built along the curve of a river, the buildings impossibly tall and glimmering with light. Hi, Lunathian! And then she passes into a world of snow-capped mountains, with thousands of shining stars flying overhead. Quote, where a winged male stood beside a heavily pregnant female, gazing at those very stars. Hello, Rhys and Feyre from this Starfall. Aelin is unable to slow down, so she reaches out her hand to see if she can signal to them to help me. And Rhys's head snaps towards her, I'm assuming hearing her using Daemati powers, and he lifts out a hand, shooting a blast of dark power. Aelin realizes that this is a wall and a shield that slams into her that slows her down, and then she vanishes from the world just like that. It's less than a quarter of a page, but you can't read that and not totally freak out. Something I love is that Kingdom of Ash came out actually in October 2018, and Silver Flames came out in
February 2021. For reference, though, ACOFAS came out in May 2018, so a little bit before Kingdom of Vast. So she already knew that Feyre was going to be pregnant at Aelin flying across the sky at Starfall. This pregnancy Easter egg is just so fun that she already knew what was in store for Feyre in Silver Flames.
So does this mean that Throne of Glass, ACOTAR, and Crescent City are all on the same timeline? Because Aelin is falling through worlds, but not necessarily timelines, right? That's been my understanding, and it makes the most sense. Do you agree, Nicole?
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense.
Though if all the worlds are on the same timeline, it does squash a lot of theories about potential generational connections between universe characters. But I think that this really does show that they are all on the same timeline.
Well, something that would kind of make me go, huh, is that if Flame and Shadow is about 6 months after this, so Aelin's 19? She's about to become the Queen of Terrasen officially with the end of the war and all that kind of stuff. Where is Lydia in this timeline then? Because we know Lydia is a descendant of Bran and Galathinius, but some people have assumed that it means that she's a descendant of Aelin and Rowan. I personally don't think so, because timeline-wise, that wouldn't add up.
Isn't Brandon from about 10,000 years ago or so?
Yes, the Brandon is from many years ago.
So I could see a descendant of his going over to Midgard during the Northern Rift. So Lydia is an ancestor of his, but from thousands and thousands of years ago when his descendants migrated to Midgard.
Yes, one of the main reasons that people think Lydia is Aelin and Rowan's is because she has that ruby ring, which is similar to how Rowan's ring is described, but it's not a one-to-one comparison. So I agree with you. I think that she's a distant cousin of Aelin and
I agree. Aelin. First, a little more about Ramiel for our serial tea time that we learn from House of Flame and Shadow. In the caves beneath the prison, Nesta points out a carving of the cauldron perched on top of Ramiel with the 3 stars above it. And we learn from Celine's download that the Daglin apparently kept the cauldron at the base of the monolith at the top of Ramiel. So, you know how Annelius defended the pass to ensure the Daglin's forces couldn't get up Ramiel? I think he was making sure the Daglin couldn't get back to the cauldron. So the Fae forces had gained control of the cauldron, which the Daglin originally had control of the cauldron. And so Annelius was risking his life to protect the greatest asset of all. Perhaps the top of Ramiel is also the original location of the cauldron. In fact, also from Celine's download, we see a visual of Thea standing on top of Ramiel with Theon. So I think the made objects like Whitian were dipped into the cauldron from this location. I'm leaning toward the onyx monolith being made too, since legend says it has been around since before the Night Court. Well, all of this history went down well before the courts were established. And it was here too, maybe, that the Daglin warped the cauldron. Perhaps that is somehow connected to the sacred mountain being barren. We also know about the onyx monolith that it immediately heals anyone who touches it, as Emery and Gwen will tell us in the next episode, and it takes them to where they are needed most. Previously, we had thought that it just takes you to the camp. I'll just say kind of like to the Illyrian safety area, but they are taken to the river house. So I also think that maybe it wasn't only the cauldron that the Daglin needed to get up to the top for. Maybe they were wanting to get to the monolith so that they could transport to another realm, perhaps. One more thing here, because I can't stop talking about Ramiel. Vesperus also hints that the Asteri/Daglin hid pockets of their power beneath sacred mountains, which might also have to do with these mysterious tunnels and underground palaces too. Yes, I absolutely think so.
Yes.
Vesperus also says that their magic draw all sorts of creatures. So I am convinced that these ancient and cunning beasts gravitate toward Ramiel because of the Asteri's magic that is hiding within it. And the Asteri are these beasts' original creators.
There's a few other Ramiel theories that I want to throw out there as well. There are quite a number of theories. I couldn't find the original poster about this, but Ramiel is a possible entrance to hell. So maybe that's also why the Asteri were trying to get to the top, because they want to get to hell and really show Apollyon what's
possibly. That also makes sense with these beasts.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Oh my God. Yes, exactly. It's almost like how the Northern Rift connects Midgard to Hell and other realms. This is almost like the Northern Rift of Prythian. So maybe Ramiel is also a thin place too. There's no mention of mist, at least that I found, but that might just be oversight. This also might be how Thanatos keeps getting in and out of the fucking world, because he is mentioned in ACOTAR how Thanatos' daughter is giving him, problems. This from Kier in the Court of Nightmares. But we know Thanatos is the Prince of the Ravine, aka the fourth Prince of Hell. Also, Orestes, one of the 3 stars on top of the mountain, is connected to the Greek god that is being chased down by Enris, aka Fury, aka Thanatos' daughter. I'm still so convinced that Fury is Thanatos' daughter, and then her.
Wow,
and Hunter
this is like a blast from the past with the theories. Man, we haven't talked about this in months.
I lay awake at night, literally saying Thanatos' daughter is Fury. Thanatos' daughter is Fury. I'm so convinced. Sierra Darling on Reddit also takes this a step further, wondering if Anelius is now one of the princes of hell too. We have 7 levels. Level 7.
Real quickly, because we also know that Anelius needed to get to the top of Ramiel and his guts were hanging out, and that's where he died. Well, the Onyx Monolith literally heals anybody who touches it. So maybe 2 options here. One is he tried to get to the top so that he could be healed and he did not make it, to actually touch it. Or he did touch it and he didn't actually die right there. And
he's just in hell.
And he's in hell. Now, this is also 15,000 years later, so I don't think an Illyrian would still be alive, but...
And Apollyon are still alive, and they were there 15,000 years ago with Thea.
True, but Anelius is an Illyrian.
True. But what if he's like an Illyrian plus? I don't know.
I mean, they do call him a warrior god, so...
Yeah, exactly. So we know that level 7 is the pit, aka Apollyon. We know that level 5 is the chasm, which is governed by Adis, with Thanatos right above him as level 4, the ravine. There are still levels 1 through 3 and then 4. This is the hollow, the trench, the canyon, and the abyss. Could Anelius be any of these princes? I tried to figure out if there was any that we could connect to like his name, and I couldn't find any. But there's also a theory that the monolith on top of Ramiel is a word gate. And this is why a lot of people think that you can literally touch it and then you're transported out of the blood, right? A la Portkey style. If that is the case, a huge part of ACOTAR 6 might be discovering this word gate, and it might be a possible way to connect to the Tog world again. I will never, ever, ever forget the fact that Rift Hold is called Rift Hold, like the Northern Rift. So maybe this is somehow to connect it to Dorian, and then Dorian's just going to come on top of Ramiel and be like, what's up, motherfuckers?
All right. Oh my gosh. We could literally go on and on and on about the top of Ramiel, what's underneath Ramiel, the Onyx Monolith, all of this. I have a few more things to add to the Surreal Tea Time, and you know exactly what I'm about to say here. When Bryce reopens the portal to the House of Wind from Midgard after defeating the Asteri, she returns the mask and truth teller. You hear that, Nicole? She returns the emotional support dagger. We learn that Nesta's been in the doghouse since she gave Bryce the mask, but she also got to bond with Ember and get a glimpse into what love from a mother is like. Ember tells Nesta as they part, quote, "You'll find your way." I want to really quickly go back to what we were talking about with Nesta saying she doesn't want to rule the world. She only wants Cassian. And I do think that in the months between this, there is going to be some inner conflict of how that might not be enough. Maybe not for her, seeking the power, but her realizing she is destined for more, and it scares her. And going back to that self-discovery journey where she really does tap into that leadership quality that she does have deep down. And then, of course, the big kahuna. Bryce hands Gwydion / the Star Sword to Nesta and tells her, quote, "I think that 8-pointed star was tattooed on you for a reason. Take that sword and go figure out why." Let's fucking go! So yes, all in all, the 8-pointed star is extremely important. It is linked to Nesta, and she is destined to learn more about it. And it is impossible to be talking to all of you about ACOTAR 6 predictions without including this Crescent City spoiler. And last thing to note, Rhys is an overprotective dad to baby Nyx, and I just absolutely love it. There.
That's the Rhysand that I miss. Like, yes. Rhysand in Crescent City acts more like Rhysand from ACOTAR than ACOTAR Rhysand.
So some people do have an issue with how he pretty much put Nesta in the doghouse with, the whole mask thing. And people are really upset because they had such a beautiful ending here. And the way that I see it is they do still have their struggles with one another because their personalities are so different, but they are able to come together and be able to work around their issues. Yeah, Rhys, that is, to me, in character for him to be like, I'm sorry, you gave away a dread trove item to another realm? Like, come on, who would not be mad about that?
And a realm that has the Daglers who are trying to get back into Prythian. If I was Rhys, I'd be furious. Absolutely. I do also want to point out that there is a line when they're holding baby Nyx, and he's described as having, quote, blue eyes that already glowed with his father's and mother's starlight. And mothers. Yes, we know that Feyre has starlight. It's assumed that she got it from the day court. Possibly, maybe. Who fucking knows?
Oh, see, I always understood it as her being the high lady of the night court and really leaning into that night star quality. Like there's the magic of the night court for her.
I think that's what we're supposed to think. And I think the actualness of it is she is a descendant of Thea.
Oh, I 100% agree. You know I will die on that hill. Yes.
Yes, I think like there are a few hills that I think we're willing to die on as we go into ACOTAR 6, and I'm sure we'll cover this in our next episode as we wrap up ACOTAR. The Archeron's descendant of Fae.
Yep.
That is a dying on a hill dramatic death that I will do. Speaking of Nyx, we get to see the beginning of Auntie Nesta and her love that she has for her nephew. As we know from Flame and Shadow, when Nesta has the mask on, it overpowers her, for lack of a better term. And no matter what Asriel says, it does not get through to her mind, so she can overrule the maid power and take it off. The House of Wind doesn't do it. Emery and Gwen don't do it. Feyre and Elaine, nope, no way. Even Cassian doesn't do it until, quote, Nyx is waiting too. And then the silver fire goes out and the mask falls to the floor. That is some big anti-energy right there. I love that. Speaking of the mask, though, Nesta mentions in this stretch how the trove needs to be kept far, far, far away from her. I'm assuming that something happens in the next 6-ish months, because we know that's the difference between the end of Silver Flames and when Bryce falls into Prythian, because Nesta does wield the mask when Bryce is in Prythian, when they're in the caves. And while it doesn't seem like she uses it regularly based on, you know, Asriel's like, don't you dare to Nesta in House of Flame and Shadow, it doesn't seem like it's the first time she's used it either.
That's interesting because I could read it both ways. One is where she knows what to do. She's worn it several times already, like we've seen here in this book, but it's not like it's a regular occurrence. Like she just knows what to do because it is. Yeah. So I think it could be read either way, that it's the first time she's used it, possibly. Since
no matter what, I don't think it's like frequently where it's like every week, once a week, I talk to the dread. I don't think it's like that. But I think it's like maybe once or twice it's been used. However, if the trove is being used, I say frequently, more than once in this 6 months, is that why it's harder for her to take it off?
I have an idea, but first I do want to say that this confirms that despite Nesta giving back most of her power to the cauldron, she can still wield the trove. I wonder if it was harder to take off because she doesn't have as much power than before.
Oh, I love that.
Yes.
Yep.
And one more thing to mention too, as regards to like her tattoo and the bargain with the cauldron and all of that. The reason that we know that it is not the same 8-pointed star is because she says to Bryce, and I'm sorry, I don't have this quote in front of me, but it's something to the effect of, I used to have it tattooed on me. Yeah. She does not ever mention, at least that I picked up, that she has a current tattoo, whether it's the 8-pointed star or not. So we still don't know what the deal is with the cauldron one. I'm really wondering if it was a bargain that she made and then it was completed.
It like came and went?
A wave, yeah. Came, washed over, there's the ink, and then it washed back and it's gone. I have no idea, but yeah.
I will say, I don't think she would share that she has a bargain with the cauldron to someone like Bryce, who she is pretty suspicious of.
I agree, but we can confirm that it is not the 8-pointed star.
Whew. You did it! You listened to the whole thing! Thank you so much for being part of this Maasverse journey.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. Next Monday, August 24th, is our deep dive into one of our favorite movies of all time, How to Train Your Dragon, which also happens to be a live show we did in Seattle, Washington. Thank you, as always, to our top Maasverse detective, aka our content researcher, Brooke, and our executive producer / sanity manager / co-host of the Fantasy FanFellas podcast, Hayden. And a special thank you to our newest addition of the team, John, our podcast editor, aka our very own World Walker here at Fantasy Fangirls.
check out fantasyfangirls.com for tons of book resources and trivia and all sorts of other stuff to prepare us for ACOTAR 6. And we are also very active on social media. So please be sure to follow us on Instagram and / TikTok at Fantasy Fangirls Pod. And if you're watching this on YouTube or want to watch on YouTube to see what our hair looked like at the beginning of 2024 to the end of 2024, please hit that subscribe button to keep following along.
While you're hitting buttons, don't forget to hit that 5-star button on whatever podcasting platform you are listening on. And if you're feeling extra generous towards these two girls who had 18 books open on their computers for 11 months at a time, then write a little love note in that review section as well. It is so helpful, not just for this podcast, but for any and all podcasts you listen to. And last, but certainly not least, share this episode with your fellow Maasverse friends. If you are like Charlie from Always Sunny in Philadelphia with the red tape and the pointing of the fingers and the twitchy eyes, if you have a person like that in your life, if you are the person who everyone's doing an intervention for you, this is a great episode to send to your friends and be like, see, there's a reason.
Bye.
Bye.